Chapter 1451. The corpse that had been completely cut in half was in a strange position, like a broken doll. It twisted and spun a few times in the air before finally falling heavily to the ground. Blood should have been splattering everywhere from the cut, or at the very least, there should have been traces of blood. But now, there was only a white light. The extremely cold ice elemental sealed the entire cut. This scene made everyone's jaws drop. The hoof's expression froze for a full 3 seconds before she said, "Mark, I didn't know you were so strong." Only now did everyone realize that it was the Alliance's envoy Mark Dooku, who had appeared out of nowhere and killed the Demoness in one shot. Duke glanced at the situation on the side. Merrill and the Dreadlord were still fighting each other. If he didn't intervene, there would be no clear winner in a short period of time. So, he didn't care anymore. Turning around, Duke looked at the hoof, who was still in a daze. "Are you all right? You didn't send me to die?" The hoof asked out of nowhere, almost causing Duke to roll his eyes in anger. "I've already saved you, and you're still asking me this?" No, the hoof's IQ was now as high as 5 points. There was no way he could talk to her properly. After a while, the hoof came back to her senses. Hurry up and help Ma Rad." The hoof's IQ seemed to have increased a little. Not bad, it was about 50 points. Although it was still a distance away from the average human, at least it was more reliable. Duke did not even look at her. "Imriel, let me tell you a little common sense. When the situation has been decided, leaving the battlefield to the real heroes is the glory of a man." "Oh." The hoof nodded as if she understood. On the other side, the Dreadlord Rosiris was actually scared out of his wits. Others did not know how powerful Duke's move was, but Rosiris, whose power was barely equivalent to that of a low-level Void Lord, had the ability to tell. That was at least a Breaking Dawn, and not an ordinary Breaking Dawn either. It was a powerhouse who was infinitely close to the demigod realm. How did the small humans produce so many powerhouses? Rosiris did not have the time to care. He only knew that many of his compatriots had died in Azeroth, and even their souls could not return. Now, the grass on his grave was 3 feet high, and he had given away his great power to others to play with. Demons were never loyal. The only thing that could make demons obey was power. None of the demons thought highly of Illidan, but Illidan, the lackey of the army, seemed to be quite strong, so they reluctantly served him. Rosiris was already very unhappy that he was sent to this remote sentry post. However, he was not strong enough, so he naturally could not claim a certain floor as his own territory in the Darkness Shrine. Now he wanted to run. However, he suddenly discovered that the space around him had been sealed. Just how strong was this mysterious mage? On the other side, Duke had no time to deal with a mere Dreadlord. However, since he had already seen it, it would be too shameful for him to let the other party escape. In any case, with the difference in rank, he could easily use the elements of the weave to disperse the arcane elements in the surroundings, making teleportation impossible. Of course, this was obviously bullying an opponent who was of a lower rank. Duke did not care and looked at the broken hoof. Rarely, the hoof actually blushed. Don't look. Am I in a sorry state now?" It would have been better if Imriel had not reminded him. Now that he had mentioned it, Duke looked at the hoof carefully. The brave girl was filled with holy light and swung her warhammer at the evil Queen of Pain, but she was ruthlessly taught a lesson by the other party's whip and almost became a masochist. This broken armor. It was like a rag that had been repeatedly trampled on. All right. Duke shamefully became an honest and reliable young man for once. He took off his cloak and put it on the hoof. He casually cheated. Strictly speaking, he did not make a move. However, his eyes traversed the endless space and landed on Rosiris, who had temporarily become the Demon King of Misery. It had to be known that since there was a weave of the highest level in the surroundings, this land was equivalent to being in Duke's domain. A powerful demigod staring at a small dreadlord was no different from a cruel spider staring at a prey that had fallen into its web. As the prey, all that was left was fear. The dreadlord was supposed to spread fear, but now he was overwhelmed by it. What a joke. Yet, it had happened in an incomparably real manner. Rosiris, who had been attacking continuously and seemed to have the upper hand, quickly made a fatal mistake. He used too much force in his attack and lost his balance. Merrill, who had been through tens of thousands of years and had honed his skills through countless battles, was a veteran. He could tell that the enemy had really made a mistake and was not baiting the enemy. Merit immediately showed Imriel the correct way to use Reckoning. Reckoning could launch a storm of attacks in a short period of time, but these additional attacks could be blocked. In order to increase the damage taken by the enemy, before activating Reckoning, one had to hit the enemy's head with holy light and use Sanction to stun the enemy before activating Reckoning. This was the standard way to maximize damage. His explosive muscles swelled to the limit, and his burly body covered in heavy armor made an unimaginable thief's quick attack movement. In an instant, the Dreadlord, who was as tall as a building, was smashed into meat paste by the holy light warhammer. His entire upper body, along with his armor, was smashed into an unknown mixture. The battle was over. Oh! We won! Praise the holy light! Ha 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 ha! Cheers could be heard everywhere. He covered his cloak tightly with his hooves, as if he was afraid that he would be exposed. He didn't feel it during the bloody battle, but now that a gust of wind blew, his buttocks hurt. It was obvious that the Queen of Pain had drawn a lot of terrible places. Now that they had won, there was no need to trouble Xueqi with such a small matter as cleaning up the battlefield. After returning to the Wildhammer stronghold that was under construction, Duke thought that everything would be fine. Who knew that when night fell, Hoofs would come to visit him on tiptoe. It's so late. What's the matter? Hoofs stammered. I was injured during the day, but both myself and the priests in the fortress said that they could not cure it. They said that only warlocks could cure it. But there are no warlocks in the fortress. Bronzebeard Prince asked me to find you. How? What injury? Why is it so troublesome? Xueqi was curious. Usually, the holy light was the nemesis of shadow power. Even if it was not effective, it could be forcefully neutralized with a higher quality or a larger amount of holy light. There were no heroic priests in the fortress, but there were still a few high-level priests. Even they could not handle it. Chapter 1452. The hoof took small steps forward and moved closer. Xueqi noticed that she was still covering her buttocks. Imriel was unusually insistent. You have to swear not to tell anyone, and not to laugh at me. Fine, I swear. Suddenly, a rumble of thunder came from afar, as if justice was about to be meted out to someone. Xueqi shuddered, and finally screamed in his mind. What the hell? Who's going through ascension here? I'll never admit that the sentence, I swear if it's not XXX, let the heavens strike me with lightning might come true. The sudden thunder startled the hoof, and she took a small step back. Then, as if her wound had been torn, she grimaced in pain. She seemed to be thinking about it, and after a long struggle, she finally showed the wound to Xueqi. She took off her cloak and turned around. Under the illumination of the magic lamp, he could see whip marks from her back all the way to her buttocks. Although there was holy light around the wound, when the holy light gathered to a certain point, it was firmly resisted by the black aura in the middle of the scar. And every time the holy light resisted, the wound would tear again, causing Imriel more pain. Should I say, as expected of the Queen of Pain? Xueqi sighed. Is it troublesome? Do I have to trouble my teacher? But Teacher Valen is very weak. I don't want to trouble him. Xueqi scratched his head. The hoof's wound could be simple, but it was also difficult. Because he was the one who killed the Queen of Pain. When a normal strong person killed a demon, it was a physical death. But when he killed her, he destroyed part of her soul. It could not be helped. He had learned it when he joined the Burning Legion in the Ancient War, so naturally, it was convenient. Xueqi did not intend to promote it, and he could not. After all, capturing or destroying souls was the domain of sorcerers. Not every pharaoh could cross the domains of sorcerers, priests, and some sorcerers like him. He killed the Queen of Pain, Gabrisa, and destroyed her soul. In her despair, the demoness used the remnant of her soul to cast the most terrifying curse she could on the hoof. It was a powerful curse that was a mixture of resentful souls and high-purity dark energy. Its level of mystery was quite high. To be honest, even Willen wouldn't be able to handle it. That was because Willen was a priest at heart. Priests were good at exorcism, but dispelling curses was the domain of mages. However, since she ran into him, it served her right to be unlucky. That demoness cursed you with the remnants of her soul. Because she is a very powerful demon, your curse is indeed very troublesome. Then, the hoof said bitterly. She seemed to be in despair. How could it be easy for her to suffer such an injury on her first battle? But you're very lucky to have met me. I can help you settle it. After saying that, Xueqi snapped his fingers and silently called out in his heart. Immediately, Alonce's Fail cast a spell for him from the weave. The hoof could only feel that outside Xueqi's room, there seemed to be a very powerful priest casting a spell. In the blink of an eye, a beautiful holy light magic circle that seemed to have every magic pattern appeared under their feet, and enveloped the entire room. Xueqi pointed at the bed. Lie down. Before I say, okay. No matter what happens, you are not allowed to turn around. Got it? Got it. The hoof was overjoyed, and ran over to lie down. It had to be said that because of their body structure, the recurved calves made the Dreenie's posture a little funny when they lay down. It felt like they were kneeling, and purposely arched their buttocks. Xueqi held back his laughter, which was rare. Show me all your wounds. The hoof was a little reluctant, but she still did as she was told, and her pants were halfway down. Of course, there was no chance for her to be exposed, because she had already put on the thong library. Done. It was like a mosquito buzzing. As for the hoof, Xueqi really did not have any crooked thoughts. Although he was already a dragon knight, and also the famous Naga conqueror, when he was in actual combat, one was a standard human, and the other was an elf, so he did not have any psychological burden. The hoof, after all, was really not Xueqi's cup of tea. For Xueqi, driving away the soul of an elite female demon with at most a bit of blood was just a small matter. The important thing was that this was a rare opportunity, and Xueqi had to collect some interest no matter what. The tail. The tail, unknowingly, Xueqi began to play with the agile light blue tail. Xueqi muttered to himself, this feeling of fullness. Why does it feel like I'm masturbating? Oh no, like stroking a cat. Stroking a cat was addictive. There was still a chance to get rid of the drug addiction, but the addiction of the heart was another matter. As Xueqi dispelled the curse, he played with Imriel's tail that was less than half a meter long. It felt so good. The feeling of holding it just right. The wonderful feeling of blood pulsating, the unimaginable agility, and the feeling of being alive. That's great. Xueqi was having fun. On the other side, Imriel, who strictly followed the instructions and refused to turn back, fell into a shameful, slightly painful and sour hell. The Dreenie's tail was very sensitive. Although it was not known whether they were more like canines or cats, there was no creature with a tail that liked to be played with. Even cats and dogs would be unhappy, let alone a living Dreenii. But the hoof did not dare to resist, not even to protest. She had been cursed so badly, and in order not to hurt the vitality of her old teacher, she could only beg this guy who had forced her to lead her troops into battle. It was because of this strange ill-fated relationship that she trusted this mark, but was also a little afraid of him. Who would have thought that this guy would play with her tail while he was healing? At this moment, the hoof's heart was full of tears. To my dear sister. Although I know that this is a healing session, and this Lord Mark Dooku did not offend me, I do not know why I feel so ashamed. Sister, am I not going to marry anymore? Xueqi did not know about the hoof's strange thoughts. In any case, he had a good time. Half an hour later, Imriel left Xueqi's room in exhaustion. Looking at her unsteady steps, he really thought that she had been played to death. But when the other Dreenii saw her healing wound, they all came over to congratulate her. It's done? Yes. That Lord Dooku did not do anything to you, did he? No, he just accidentally touched my tail, and it felt weird. No one cared, and instead said something like, it's okay, as long as the wound heals. Hoof thought that the matter had come to an end, but who knew that 3 days later, the shameless Xueqi would give another order. This time, the task was even heavier. He ordered her to lead 10,000 troops to attack the fortress that was closer to the western entrance of the Moon Shadow Valley. Chapter 1453. Here, the Burning Legion uses the Furnace of Death to mass-produce hellfire. We must destroy the Burning Legion's arsenal. But please note, because this place is very important, there are not only a large number of Heaven's Punishment Walkers and Terror Rulers, there are also a few Fel Mechs, as well as Lord of the Abyss Macedon, Mogororon, Shivala's Prophetess, Cavarin, and many other powerhouses. 3 days ago, she had been pushed from a newbie, who hadn't even led 5 soldiers to a captain who led 2,000 men and a small experimental bee squadron. How many days had it been? She was about to be asked to lead 10,000 people? And it was to attack the Burning Legion's important stronghold? According to the intelligence, there were almost 1,000 Heaven's Punishment Walkers and Terror Rulers, not to mention the powerhouses. Normally, an intermediate demon would require a team of at least 5 beginner professions to be able to contend against it. Not to mention the Lord of the Abyss who could single-handedly destroy an entire regular infantry regiment. Even if the Alliance had the support of the flying battleships, their combat power was simply not proportional. Not to mention her and the 2 dwarven leaders. Even Merid, who was most obedient, widened his eyes and was speechless. I. Hoof said the word I 3 times in a row, but could not find the words to refute. What are you afraid of? If something happens, I will naturally take responsibility. Apart from the higher-ups of the Alliance, no one knew how much power this so-called Alliance envoy had. Speaking of which, where are we going to get 10,000 soldiers? High Lord Yorger asked in return. Duque pointed at him. Don't we still have your troops? Damn it! Mother Rock above, the stronghold is not built yet, and you're asking me to pull the defense troops out? Duque shrugged. There's no other way. The stronghold is already a threat to our shipping routes. There have been no enemies attacking the stronghold recently, so we might as well pull half of the defense troops out to clear the rear. Yorger was so angry that he almost stomped his feet. At this moment, Imriel's eyes were gleaming with determination. It's all right. I believe that Sir Envoy must have his reasons for making such a seemingly unplanned decision. Perhaps it will be like the Royal Brothel Squad from last time. There are some existences that we don't know about, but are still powerful enough to help us destroy the enemy. Imriel puffed out his chest and sucked in his stomach. His words made it difficult for Duque to continue his act. You son of a bitch! You already have the aura of a fanatic and a martyr. Why would I need to pretend? Speaking of which, do your parents know that you're so smart? Originally, Duque did want to cultivate the Hoof's ability, and he also wanted to cultivate her trust. Since he had been seen through, there was no point in hiding anymore. Duque smiled. You saw through it? That's fine. Since you're smart this time, let's see if your cleverness has backfired on you. The Hoof had not finished thinking about what Duque meant. Duque waved his hand, and on the vast 3D map in the fortress command room, a huge green arrow appeared. It extended from the western entrance of the Moon Shadow Valley all the way to the front of the fortress. This is... Bu Lang smacked his lips. Green skin. Duque raised his eyebrows. As expected, hatred was not so easily forgotten. 24 years for humans was at least a generation. For the dwarves, who lived longer, it was just a growing experience in 1 generation. It was not that Bu Lang did not know who Mark's original body was, but he still could not control himself. This was very telling. As expected. Regarding the Alliance's recent efforts to support the Beastmen and rescue the millions of Beastmen, the dissatisfaction had spread from the bottom up. Of course, the wise people would pay more attention to the threat of the Burning Legion in the future. But the feelings of the people and soldiers were more direct. Think about it, even the dwarves, the old members of the Alliance, were like this, let alone the Dreenii who had been fighting with the Beastmen a while ago. Even a kind-hearted little girl like the Hoof, who did not know much about the affairs of the world, had a helpless expression on her face. Duque, who was in Karazhan, bared his teeth. Then Mark, who was in the Wildhammer Fortress, laughed. Maybe, some people will ask, isn't this part of the entrance of the Moon Shadow Valley flooded? Or maybe some people will ask, since when did the Alliance have to rely on the green skin? I want to say, you're all wrong. Is there a mistake? Unknowingly, when Mark Dooku stood up and pressed his hands on the 3D map table, the aura that he revealed when he leaned forward slightly shocked everyone. This was not an ordinary aura. This was an aura that was calm and unhurried. This was an aura that made everything in the world work for him. When this oppressive aura suddenly spread out, everyone had a premonition that in the next second, this Alliance envoy's words would be extremely shocking, even earth-shattering. As expected, the entrance of the valley was flooded? Hee. The Alliance said that it's a lake. That's a lake. If they say that it's land, it's land. Don't forget, how did the water come about? Similarly, about relying on the green skin. You're thinking too much. Wherever the Alliance wants the tribe to go to fight, wherever they send their warriors to die, they have to go. Because this is the general trend. Remember, the Alliance has never been a pitiful organization for the weak to hug each other for warmth. If we want to avoid the Burning Legion's persecution, we can just hide in Azeroth, which has the planet's protection array. Why organize an expeditionary army from the Outer Realm? We're here to chop off the Burning Legion's claws. If you dare to reach out to Azeroth, you must be mentally prepared to have your claws and even your head chopped off by us. The Alliance can protect women and children, but it won't protect cowards. Whether it's humans, dwarves or Draenei, everyone who joins the Alliance must be mentally prepared to sacrifice themselves for this. Don't be afraid of whatever killed Jaden. The Alliance commander, Duke Marcus, is already a demigod. He killed the Demon King, Sargeras, and assassinated the Legion commander, Archimonde. If Kill Jaden dares to come, he will definitely kill Jaden as well. The matters above the clouds will naturally be settled by the great gods above the clouds. We just do what we need to do, understand? His words were like a barrage of cannons, and everyone in the command center was stunned. It didn't matter if he was a high and mighty king, or a general who climbed up from the commoners. Imriel couldn't help but cover his mouth. What a heroic spirit that was. Moving mountains and rivers, driving the enemy to his own use, cutting off the claws and scales of the universe's nightmares. This kind of spirit at the end of the mortal world's power, was this the supreme courage of the Lord Commander that he had never met? Chapter 1454. In the face of reconciling ethnic hatred again, Xueqi felt satisfied in Karazhan. After all, even if he had become a demigod, his base was still the Alliance. A guy who lost his position to please the orcs was destined to have a tragedy. In the end, Xueqi was just following his heart. As for dealing with Kill Jaden, of course, it was because Kill Jaden was doing something big at this moment, digging a hole for him. How could he have the time to come to the Outland to deal with him? What's more, he's making it clear that he's following his heart. Come on, everybody, repeat after me. Follow at the top, and at the bottom, at the bottom. That's right. It's the word coward. Men hide under the bed. Oh no, hide in their lair. If you can't say it, then don't come out. Writing without backbone, read as restraint. Anyway, as long as Kill Jaden doesn't descend from the Outland, no one can prove that the Alliance's commander, Duke Marcus, is a coward in Azeroth. He. From the first day he transmigrated, Xueqi was a coward. At first, he didn't want to fight to become a ghoul, then he didn't want to join the Burning Legion and was sold by President Sargeras, and then he stabbed President Sargeras to death. Just as Xueqi was feeling proud of his impromptu speech, he suddenly found that Vashj was already standing in front of him. The high elf's slender arms looked particularly elegant when she performed a maid's salute. After lifting her white gauze skirt, a small section of her white calves was revealed. Xueqi was a little puzzled. Master, your speech just now deeply touched me. In the past, I only wanted to go with the flow. It wasn't until I made the wrong choice and suffered 10,000 years of torture that I understood. The future must be fought for and cherished. Dear Master, your Xueqi is very happy now. So whether it's public or private, I will unreservedly contribute my strength. After saying that, Vashj knelt down like a cat with its back arched. She crawled over step by step, with a slightly fanatical charm on her face, and at the same time, her sexy tongue gently licked her red lips. Xueqi panicked a little. Wait, why did you hit my armor penetration? A gentleman uses his mouth, not his fists. Dear Master, I'm about to use my mouth now. Vashj pressed on. No. At this moment Xueqi's eyes were filled with tears. He sighed in his heart. The moral degeneration of the world is getting worse day by day. Why did all the maids nowadays like to counterattack? The next day, the devils in the fortress welcomed an unexpected challenge. The reckless Alliance had sent out a troop of 10,000 soldiers to deliver food to the enemy. Kavrin the Prophet was a Shivalon. These evil six-armed priestesses focused on both martial arts and magic. Their healing spells brought many of the Burning Legion's wounded back to life, while their shadowy spells kept the memories of those who had been tortured as long as their souls did not perish. These priestesses were very devout. The meaning of their existence was to spread the will of Sargeras. At the same time, on many occasions, they acted as the commanders of the army. Hearing about the Alliance's invasion, Kavrin was stunned for half a second, and then her face showed humiliation and anger. These reckless bugs, after winning under the protection of those damn Titan creations, they dare to look down on the army? Do they think we're the same as those weak trash next door who can't even enter the main army? Send out the fell reavers. I want to see those bugs tremble under the invincible power of the army. The strong looked down on the weak, and the weak envied the strong. This was the norm in the Burning Legion. The powerful devils who belonged directly to the army looked down on the weaklings who were sent to join Illidan. This was almost a matter of course. When Imriel, Merid, and Yorger brought 10,000 elites and mixed forces to a place 5 kilometers in front of the fortress, they were deeply shocked. Not everyone had seen the fell reavers of the Hellfire Peninsula with their own eyes. Although the fell reavers were technically the technology of the Eridar family from 25,000 years ago, unfortunately, this technology was lost to the Draenei. Now, the only ethereal reaver was still on the spaceship of the Storm Fortress to help them guard their home. Now, this batch of fell reavers had actually been weakened. They were created by the Morg mechanics. Although they were still very powerful, they could only be regarded as machines that used brute force after losing their arcane attack abilities. They had no intelligence and could only follow orders. The strength and defense of the fell reavers were better than the Hellfire. It could be said that they were an upgraded version of the Hellfire. However, the cost of creating them was very high, and even the Burning Legion had only created a few of them in the entire Outland. Other than the one that was forcefully killed by William and his heroes on the Hellfire Peninsula, and the Doomwalker that was now guarding the entrance of the Black Temple, the other 3 were here. In the sky, 10 kilometers away from the army led by Mark Dooku, who was sitting in the command room of the Black Pearl and watching the battle through a magic mirror, laughed. In reality, there are only 3 types of weapons in the world. Energy weapons represented by magic, kinetic weapons represented by cannonballs and arrows, and projectile missiles. Even in the Great Universe era, there are no more than these 3 types. Someone suggested that I use powerful magic to bombard these big guys. Actually, as long as I can hit the armor-piercing effect, no matter how big the enemy is, it is just a target. Bu Lang frowned. He had always had reservations about the new warship that Duque had strongly advocated for. Reducing firepower, increasing survivability and agility, he was still not sure about this trend. Although the dwarves also had the concept of using cannons to blow things up, it was to blow everything up in one shot even if the enemies were all over the mountains and plains. Bu Lang had never been able to keep up with Duque's new way of thinking that pursued accuracy and killing in one shot. Let's continue watching. Duque did not say anything further, and directly let Bu Lang continue watching. In the image, the huge fell reaver was already extremely shocking just by walking over. It was more than 10 stories tall, and every step it took on the ground would cause an earthquake-like tremor. This was not an opponent that close-range weapons could deal with at all. Countless Draenei clenched the weapons in their hands tightly, but they realized that it was completely futile. Even if they used their toes to think, they would know that the sharp or blunt weapons in their hands would not be able to cause any substantial damage to this huge metal robot. When the fell reaver approached the 10,000 people, the standard flying battleship of the Alliance opened fire. Chapter 1455. Bang bang bang. It was like a sound test before a piano performance. From the first note, it continued from the bow to the stern. Continuous smoke rose from the cannons, and immediately after, a dense rain of cannonballs fell from the sky. Hundreds of large-caliber cannonballs landed around the fell reaver, causing a chain of explosions that seemed to shatter the heavens and split the earth. 1,000 meters away, even if the unreliable Commander Hoof had spent the past few days studying the Alliance's Infantry Artillery Coordination Command Manual, and had all the infantrymen crouch on the ground or dig shallow trenches before the bombardment was completed, it still felt unbearable. What was even more unbearable was yet to come. Subconsciously, everyone thought that the explosion, which could even flatten a mountain, should have flattened everything, much less a mere fell reavers. However, the fell reavers merely knelt on the ground from the powerful impact. After the bombardment, the 3 fell reavers stood up again, and took huge strides towards the direction of the Alliance's infantrymen. Imriel was under immense pressure. The army fell reavers, which were 10 stories tall, covered nearly 10 meters in a single step. If they knew how to charge, they would be able to cover 1,000 meters in a few blinks of an eye. To retreat, or not to retreat, this was a serious problem. Commander, please make a decision. Voices that sounded like questions came from below, but were actually interrogations. Whether the 10,000 people stayed or retreated, it would be a huge risk. If they stayed, they could only hope that the Alliance's next round of bombardment would be effective. Otherwise, if they waited until the next round, they might be caught in the crossfire because they were too close. It was only a 203mm cannon, but a single shot from it could kill all humans and animals within a radius of 30 meters. Not to mention a 400mm cannon and above. If they waited too long, even if they could take care of the 3 fell reavers, the Alliance's infantrymen would still suffer heavy casualties. Retreating was also a huge problem. Because the troops had sneaked over from Illidare's sentry post, they had taken the mountain road. Mountain roads were always easy to see, but the closer one was, the farther one walked. Moreover, there were usually only 1 or 2 easy roads. It was easy to come in, but difficult to retreat. Imriel bit hard on the nail of her right thumb. Her tail seemed to be equipped with a small motor, spinning non-stop. When she was at her most hesitant, she thought of Mark Dooku, who had never disappointed anyone. From the rescue of Shotrath City, to the destruction of the fell beast men in Zangarmarsh, and then to the Illidari sentry. Imriel suddenly bit his lips. "Dead man, I'll trust you one more time." 3 seconds later, Imriel hammered the ground. "Pass down my orders. Everyone, stay where you are and wait. No one is to retreat. Those who withdrew without permission would be treated as deserters. If there's any responsibility, I'll take it." The silent uproar spread across the entire magic communication network. No one protested. No one even uttered a word. Shotrath Garrison Officer Mala did not object. High Lord Yorger did not object. So what right did they have to object to the orders of the highest commander of this army? Unless 2/3 of the lower-ranking frontline commanders collectively opposed the orders of the higher-ranking commanders. Even if the order was wrong, it had to be carried out in the most thorough manner. This was the military rule that the Alliance's commander-in-chief, Duke Marcus, had set for 24 years and had always been strictly enforced. Unknowingly, the Alliance had changed from a loose coalition of kingdoms to the strictest and most disciplined military organization that crossed national boundaries. This was the tempering that the 20 years of war had brought to the people of Azeroth. It was also the result of Xueqi and the other heroes' struggle for so many years. Even though the one leading the army was a young and seemingly inexperienced commander like Imriel, his orders were still carried out. In the distance, the sound of heavy footsteps rumbled incessantly, getting closer and closer. The soldiers who were crawling on the ground could even clearly see the gravel in front of them jumping rhythmically, and the jumping was getting higher and higher. However, not a single soldier moved, much less ran away. This was the magic of willpower, the magic of discipline. On the Black Pearl, whether it was Xueqi or the 2 dwarf kings, most of them looked at this scene with satisfaction. "All right, Mark. I've lost. Show me your secret weapon." Bu Lang made a gesture of surrender. Under Xueqi's control, Mark pressed the magic transmission button, then glared fiercely at the Pandaren with black and white fur on the other side of the magic mirror. Xueqi, the guy with the strange Chinese name, when he heard that the Alliance's envoy had ordered him to wear an oxygen mask and swim in a cesspool for an hour, his face immediately turned blue. Then, this guy was also ruthless. He didn't protest, but he filed an appeal. Then, in a special appeal conference held by the Alliance, he decisively pleaded guilty and pleaded for mercy. "I've done meritorious service for your country. I've acted cute for the various queens. His Majesty Menethil, His Majesty Barav, and His Majesty Proudmoore all liked my performance. I believe that the Alliance's Commander-in-Chief, Sir Marcus, would also not want to see your Majesties watch a panda swim in a cesspool next time." Finally, Xueqi used his ultimate move, rolling on the ground. There were always some creatures in this world that could do nothing. Just by performing the most basic eating, drinking, defecating, and acting cute, they could gain the fanatical love of people all over the world. For example, pandas. Although there was a fundamental difference between pandas and panda people, their appearance of acting cute didn't change. He really didn't know how this bastard did it. In Karazhan, Xueqi actually received 3 urgent pleas for mercy from his harem in one go. "Xueqi, I'm not against you punishing this guy, but can you change the method?" Because of her eternal youth, Kalia still looked as pure and lovely as a 16-year-old girl in the prime of her life. When she looked at Xueqi pitifully with an expression that looked like she was about to cry. What else could Xueqi do? There was no such thing as swimming in a cesspool in the Alliance's laws. In the end, it was Xueqi who didn't have the right to do it. In the end, he was only punished with writing a reflection and a small fine. Now when Xueqi looked at this guy, he couldn't help but get angry, but he could only do business. "It's your Royal Special Fleet's turn." Xueqi smiled and saluted. "Understood, Sir Envoy." The Royal Brothel Group, Oh, the Royal Special Fleet will not disappoint you. What the hell? The Royal Brothel Group became the Royal Brothel Group. You're doing this on purpose, aren't you? Xueqi was so angry that his teeth itched. Xueqi acted out how to make the black and white world colorful. He stuck out his tongue. The little red tongue looked very cute. Considering that this guy was actually a rough man, Xueqi couldn't wait to slap this bastard to death. That was a matter of no return. At this moment, in addition to the previous 3 warships, there was also Counterattack, Prestige, Nelson, Vanguard, Duke of York, and Prince of Wales. These flying warships turned their turrets at the same time and let out a deafening roar. A few seconds later, 10,000 meters away, the right arm of an army fell mech exploded. Chapter 1456. Looking at the approaching giant mech, the 10,000 soldiers kneeling on the ground trembled in fear as they prayed to the gods they believed in. The behemoth that barged into their sight should not be dealt with by mere soldiers. While military orders must be obeyed, boorish men and fools were not the same. Just as the huge tremor almost made everyone throw up last night's dinner. Time seemed to have frozen at that moment. The Lord of the Abyss, who was watching the battle from afar, turned into horror as it screamed, "No!" Amidst the flames. Everyone, including all the demons present, saw the right arm of the fell reaver suddenly twist outwards in a posture that should not have appeared in the explosion. It twisted outwards twice like a fried dough twist, and then because of the explosion at the shoulder, the entire arm fell off. There were still bright sparks at the fracture, and green demonic energy sputtered out like a fountain. What was even more ridiculous was that the arm that had fallen off was struck by another round of artillery. It spun and flew towards a mechanical device made by Morgo not far away, easily smashing it into smithereens. Everyone's mouth was agape. An earth-shattering cheer immediately broke out in the Allied forces camp. Long live the Alliance! F***ck these big toys! Ha ha ha! Compared to the cheers of the Allied camp, the Morgo technicians were shocked. The Fell Reaver's 200 mm thick armor was penetrated? Because it was an alloy filled with demonic energy. Even the powerful magic of a Breaking Dawn Archmage might not be able to penetrate its armor. Similarly, even the brute strength of the Lord of the Abyss could not easily penetrate the alloy armor. Why did it become like paper in front of the humans' cannons? The foreman Morgo was furious. Counterattack! Fire the cannons and counterattack! Demonic cannons were a necessary facility for every demonic foundry camp. Every demonic foundry camp would first set up demonic cannons before construction to provide protection for Gon Urge and Morgo, who were working on the construction. There was no lack of demonic cannons in the Outlands, and this time was no exception. Many of the demonic cannons hidden underground were pushed out from the bunkers by the craftsmen and fired directly into the sky. The high-density dark energy cannonballs left a trail of green glow in the dark sky, as they flew toward the Alliance's airships hovering in the sky. Retreat! Retreat! Retreat immediately! In order to cover the retreat of the main force, brave frigates rushed up from time to time, using their relatively weak magic shields as the main force of the warships and cruisers to withstand the attacks of the large-caliber demonic cannons. Their fates were often tragic. The spherical white shield lasted less than a second before it turned into elemental particles and scattered in the air. Under the direct attack of the cannons, most of the ship's keel broke in one go. The dark energy that charged straight in easily swept through the entire armory, and triggered an even more powerful explosion. Broken wood, twisted cannon barrels, and broken limbs of humans and dwarves rained down from the sky. This scene was simply too horrible to look at. Bu Lang covered his eyes. Xueqi sighed. See. If it were a new type of warship with an isolation cabin, it wouldn't have exploded so easily. Bu Lang nodded silently. If he had listened to Xueqi and given up the multi-cannons earlier, there would not have been this moment of sacrifice. The only thing to be thankful for was that, with the desperate cover of the small ships, the main force finally flew out of the range of the demonic cannons. Draenor itself was a planet with a smaller radius than Azeroth, so its crust had a larger curvature. Even after the planet exploded, the remaining continents or regions were the same. When it flew more than 4,000 meters away from a target, the warship would look like it had sunk below the horizon. The demonic cannons that could only hit directly could not hit it at all, but the new cannons of the Alliance attacked in a parabola. Although the hit rate of the attack from 10,000 meters away was simply unbearable to look at, the new cannons hitting the Fell Reavers were like a sledgehammer hitting an egg. It was fine if it missed. But if it did, not only would the egg white and yolk flow out, even the eggshell would turn into powder. Even with the help of the army, the crossfield attack of the giant cannons was still a matter of luck. Fortunately, the alliance had always been lucky where the hooves were. After just 3 rounds of cannons, the 3 huge fell reavers were dead. The first fell reavers was the luckiest. It only had 1 hand and 1 leg hit, and it fell to the ground, twitching like an epileptic. The second fell reavers was the worst. Unfortunately, it was hit in the chest by Hu Diheo's soul striker. The armor-piercing round, which weighed more than a ton, had pierced through the chest armor and hit the fell reaver directly, causing a huge explosion. It even affected the third fell reaver, which was close by. The third fell reaver even had its left leg blown off, and it was rolling on the ground in a ridiculous manner. Without the fell reavers, which the infantry feared the most, it was time for the charge. Charge! Imriel raised his warhammer high. The loud bugle call rang throughout the Alliance's camp. The area that seemed to be completely empty a moment ago was instantly filled with a dense crowd of people. Not only that, without any warning, the water level of the muddy lake north of the fortress suddenly dropped at a speed visible to the naked eye. In just a minute, the water dragon that once looked like a huge river had disappeared without a trace. Only the clear watermarks on the red stones told others that there used to be a raging river here. Just as Hoof led the Dreenii and dwarves as the main force of the infantry, and just went around the broken fell reavers, and were about to reach the fortress in a few minutes, a loud noise came from the direction where the water receded. Woo woo! The long bugle call sounded like it had been for thousands of years. Marad stopped in his tracks and looked into the distance. His expression changed slightly. The Beastman's bugle. Marad stomped his hooves, but he still continued to charge. They used to have a grudge that would not end until one of them died. Their blood had merged on the battlefield and dyed the entire Taroka forest red. Unfortunately, they were now allies. Loktar Ogre. If they did not win, they would rather die. The classic roar once again echoed in the Moon Shadow Valley. Ever since the Moon Shadow Valley became Illidan's territory and testing ground, how long had it been since such a heroic roar echoed? Many beastmen had tears in their eyes. For the Horde. The one who took the lead and raised his flaming warhammer was the Horde's chief, Thrall. Beside him, Orgrim followed closely. In addition, there was also the Tauren chief, Kane. Chapter 1457. The 3 muscular men formed the most violent assault of the Horde, charging towards the demons in the fortress from the rear. Not good. Kavelin cried out in alarm. At this moment, she finally understood that the 10,000 soldiers in front of her were just bait. The real killing blow was the main force of the orcs that could not possibly pass through the valley. She had no way of estimating how many orcs there were. In their eyes, the orcs came from the top of the mountain in the southwest, stretching all the way to the valley. There were at least tens of thousands of them. On the Black Pearl, Bulang was also speechless. It's a familiar scene, isn't it? Duque laughed. Indeed. The mountains and plains were filled with orcs who were not afraid of death. This scene made the 2 veterans who had experienced the first and second dark portals sigh with emotion. Thinking back to the past, the orcs that could drown everything had practically flattened the entire southern continent with the invasion of locusts. Stormwind City had fallen. If not for Duque's support, the steel stove fort would have collapsed due to the lack of food and medicine. 24 years had passed. Even if the Alliance had a very terrifying new cannon, once the enemy had the absolute advantage in numbers, this scene would still make any commander tremble in fear. How many people did Sal bring with him? Kudrin complained. Duque scratched his head. Originally, he said he wanted to bring 1 million people into Moon Shadow Valley. I said I couldn't afford it, so he was forced to reduce it to 200,000. No one would underestimate the 200,000 people of the Horde. The living conditions in the Outland were getting harsher every day. The old, weak, sick and disabled basically all died when Azul invaded Azeroth. The edge of the continent was collapsing day by day, and the living space was decreasing day by day. Which clan did not fight to the death to snatch a hunting ground? It was not an exaggeration to say that the current orcs were all born from mountains of corpses and seas of blood. If the only thing that restricted the orcs' combat power was their outdated weapons and equipment. But now, this problem no longer existed. The tribes could shamelessly ask the Alliance to provide them with food and holy water, but the Alliance would never provide them with weapons for free. On the continent of Azeroth Kalimdor, every goblin factory belonging to the Rustwater conglomerate was working overtime day and night. Even Duque, who was used to seeing the world, felt his scalp tingle when he saw that kind of place that could be called a sweatshop. As a price, the tribe managed to gather 300,000 sets of armor and 500,000 heavy steel weapons in a very short period of time. Nowadays, all the weapons were polished by the Naru of Shotrath City. It didn't matter if it was foot water or shampoo. At this moment, every weapon in the hands of the tribal warriors shone with golden light. Even though many of the golden lights were dull and impure, they were still weapons against demons. The beastmen's footsteps were very fast, and their endurance was also quite good. They almost didn't need to pant or slow down while charging more than 3,000 meters. Soon, tens of thousands of orcs charged into the military fortress that didn't have any special defenses. Originally there was, but before the beastmen charged, Xueqi kindly let the Royal Kiln Regiment plow the front lines where there were demonic cannons. Under the perfect coordination of the infantry and cannons, the result was that the tribe, which was basically made up of soldiers, was able to directly pull the demons into close combat without suffering much from the opponent's long-range attacks. Let the old battleship team approach. The tribe entered close combat, and then used ultra-long-range attacks from 10,000 meters away. Due to the problem of accuracy, it seemed like they were deliberately tricking their allies. Xueqi was disdainful, so he simply let the old battleship approach the military fortress and use its cannons to cover deeper into the military fortress. The moment the Black Pearl crossed the horizon and saw the military fortress, a deafening sound wave swept over like a tide. It easily passed through the thick deck of the ship and rushed into the eardrums of everyone present, washing over them repeatedly. Xueqi frowned. Although this mark didn't really have a sense of hearing, he had lowered the volume of the scene in Karazhan. A wave of green mixed with brownish-red swept across half of the land. That was countless orcs. The green ones were mostly second-generation orcs from the Azeroth expedition. At this stage, there were still very few that had been converted from the Fel orcs. The brownish-red ones were mostly from Nagrand, a clan that maintained the most primitive shamanic teachings. Regardless, the number of orcs seemed to be so large that it was hard to describe them in any human language. On the vast land that was partly red and partly dark, even though the orcs had fully displayed their characteristic of climbing mountains as if they were walking on flat ground, it still couldn't accommodate the simultaneous attacks of all the orcs. Many of the orcs had no choice but to raise the weapons in their hands and cheer from behind. In the eyes of the heartless Xueqi, these orcs were just salted fish cheering from behind, performing a salted fish stab. No matter what, the scene was still extremely shocking. The demon guards were the main force of the Burning Legion, and they had an extremely large number. But if you looked down on them, there was only one consequence: to be cleaved in half by their axes. They were warriors recruited from the Morgo clan and served as soldiers of the Legion. In the past, they could only see the demon guards charging in groups and piling up the enemies to death. But today, they saw an even more exaggerated number of orcs. They were like an army of ants in the forest, swallowing everything in their way. The hellfire from the death furnace was released in rows. The blazing flames on their bodies were the biggest threat to the melee combatants. At this moment, an empty spot on the battlefield suddenly split open, and a huge water pillar that even 100 orcs couldn't encircle soared into the sky. At the top of the water pillar, there was a vague figure of a huge water elemental. The unstable Hydus used to be Vasht's servant, but now he was one of the Alliance's thugs. He waved his round arm, and the water pillar that seemed to reach the sky suddenly poured on the heads of the hellfire. So what if it was fire? Extinguish fire with water. This time, the faces of the Legion leaders finally changed. They had their own flag, two huge double-headed swords forming a cross, and holding the two swords were impressively 6 slender arms. These represented the 3 leaders of this army. In the past 25,000 years, it had participated in hundreds of wars to exterminate planets. Although it didn't belong to the first line of the Burning Legion, it was definitely famous. Now, this legion was almost completely destroyed. Chapter 1458. The demon guards might be able to split an orc apart with brute force, but they would be chopped into meat paste by more orcs with their shiny golden axes. The few remaining army flags struggled to hold on in the green and brownish-red waves. But it didn't take long for all the army flags to be completely submerged by the orc tide. As long as the souls of the demons returned to the twisting nether, they could be resurrected countless times. The souls of the demons that were separated from their dead bodies floated in the air and laughed at the ugly orcs below. Then, they encountered something they didn't want to encounter the most. Their souls were imprisoned. Those who could peek into the spirit world could see that behind the Horde army, scarlet magic formations with complicated patterns and filled with evil aura were unfolding. At the center of these huge magic formations, there must be at least one orc warlock holding a skeleton staff and chanting. Warlocks were a profession that conflicted with the mainstream values of the Alliance. When the Dalajan was destroyed, the warlocks put in a lot of effort to help defend, which was why they were recognized by the Alliance and became a legal profession. It was just that young magic apprentices yearned to become a god of magic like their idol, Duke Marcus, rather than a dirty and evil warlock. After the warlocks failed to summon powerful demons many times and caused many tragedies, the apprentices had a bad impression of warlocks. In the Alliance, there wasn't even one warlock among 100 pharaohs. But in the Horde, the orcs, and even the newly joined Tauren and goblins were very accepting of warlocks. As a result, the number of warlocks in the Horde was similar to that of the mages, second only to the shamans. The orc warriors at the front killed the demons. The orc warlocks at the back were also enjoying this feast of souls. With the help of the magic formations, they could destroy the souls of the demon guards that were separated from their bodies. They could make them into materials that could be used to cast powerful spells, soul fragments. And the more powerful demons would be enslaved in the cruelest way. Chains that symbolized shame were chained around the necks of the Apocalypse guards. Listening to the wails of these powerful demons in the spiritual realm and seeing their miserable state of being enslaved in anger and unwillingness, the warlocks let out triumphant laughter. No one noticed that the Sun King Anastrian's dark eye sockets were flickering. If the last battle of Karaj was a feast for the Alliance, not only did the Alliance seize the powerful floating fortress of Naxxramas, but they also took in the powerful Kiraj insect people as their servants. Then this expedition to the Outland was a carnival for the orcs. A conservative estimate was that more than 2 million strong orcs would return to the embrace of the Horde, and more than 3 million women and children would actually make the orcs the dominant race in the Horde. But the Forgotten Ones didn't gain anything. They were forbidden to resurrect the dead elves and humans as the new Forsaken. As for the Beast Men, the Forgotten Ones, they did not acknowledge Anastrian's rule at all. These ingrates followed Orgrim and fought for the benefit of the Beast Men. He. Do you really think I, Anastrian Sunstrider, am a slave? The Sun King sneered. Suddenly, a magical message arrived. Anastrian, it's your turn. Take care of that 6-armed female demon. Sar's order came. Simple and straightforward, coupled with a rough voice. No matter how many times Anastrian heard it, he couldn't get used to it. The noble and elegant high elves never spoke in such a way. And every time, such a conversation would hurt Anastrian's modesty as the Sun King. The anger factor was burning in the soul fire. Yes, great chief. The Sun King still bowed respectfully. The undead had no expression to speak of. In the eyes of most living beings, the Forgotten Ones had no emotions. Obviously, they were all wrong. In this battle, Sar, Orgrim and Cain killed the Lord of the Abyss, Macedon and Magaroran. Kavrin, the female prophet of Shavara, was killed by Anastrian and her soul was captured. There was no doubt as to why the Sun King could capture the soul. True heroes often had multiple professions and were proficient in all 3 fields. Uther was not a priest turned paladin. Back then, Kel Thuzad was a pharaoh turned warlock, and later became a lich. For true geniuses, the so-called barriers of professions did not exist. The only difference was whether they wanted to do it or not. On the Black Pearl, there was a familiar yet strange guest, Muradin Bronzebeard. Oh, my second brother. Bu Lang raised a gun with a tip that looked like a trumpet and fired a shot at Muradin. Of course, there was no bullet in this old gun. It was full of inferior gunpowder. This shot did no damage to Muradin, who was in a panic and had cast Avatar halfway. It was purely a spray to his face. Yes, Muradin's face was blackened. Then, the second brother of the Bronzebeard family responded with an iron fist of love that said, "I'm bigger than you," to his third brother. The 2 idiots punched each other many times before they sat down, panting. "Are you done?" Duque asked. "No. But we'll continue in private." "All right, you guys played really well." Duque was speechless. Muradin looked left and right, and glanced at Duque, who was disguised as Mark for a long time. In the end, he nodded with a strange expression. No. In terms of tricks, we can't compare to you mages even if we play for 1,000 years. Apparently, Magni had informed Muradin of Mark Dooku's identity. Duque did not mind. This was not a secret among the true higher-ups of the Alliance. By the way, don't you need to rest? Would Magni be willing to let you come to the Outland? Big brother. He's busy dealing with his daughter Moira, Muradin continued to secretly explain to Duque. Moira Bronzebeard, the daughter of Magni Bronzebeard, was originally the princess of Iron Furnace Castle. Later, she fell in love with Emperor Dragon Thorissen of the Black Iron Tribe and followed him to Blackrock Mountain. She took her husband's surname and was called Moira Thorissen. Duque did not expect this to happen before the death of Ragnaros. However, this small plot was too secondary to the Alliance. Although it was very important to the dwarves, Logger and Nefarian were causing trouble at the same time, and Duque had no time to care about this kind of melodramatic story of the daughter of his enemy falling in love with the leader of his enemy. In the end, history quietly returned to the right path. After picking up Muradin, Magni received a report of his daughter's disappearance. He went back and urgently asked William to borrow Vale Era to investigate the matter. In the end, Vale Era did not hesitate to kill Thorissen, who raped and insulted the princess. No one knew whether it was because a grown girl could not be kept at home, or if Thorissen had conquered this beautiful dwarf princess with sex. Anyway, Moira directly announced that she had the daughter of Magni's enemy, Thorissen, and that after Thorissen's death, she would become the new queen of the Black Iron Dwarves. Chapter 1459. This result made Varela, who personally took action, extremely embarrassed. She thought that she would become a friend of women and kill bad men to warn the world, but who knew that she would become a widowmaker who murdered her husband? Of course, this also made Magni very angry. Duque could only smile bitterly about this matter. If things continued to develop like this, Magni would have an opportunity to become a demigod in a few years. However, taking advantage of Magni's unexpected apotheosis, Moira, the traitorous princess, would try to seize power. Of course, with me here, you want to overturn the heavens? Hehehe. Duque no longer paid attention to such trivial matters. He looked at the military map, where the marks of the two armies of Varian and Wajin had moved from Blade's Edge Mountain to the Nether Storm area. It seemed that it was only a matter of time before the entire Outland was resolved. It was worth mentioning that when passing through the Blade's Edge Mountain area, the Allied forces did not fight with the Gollans. He still remembered the first time Duque went to Blade's Edge Mountain in the game. He saw many black dragon corpses pierced by sharp conical stone spikes on the dragon's end. Those were the dragons that were killed by the Gollan king, Gruul. Therefore, as a demigod, Gruul had the title of Dragon Slayer. His body lived in the depths of Gruul's lair in the north of Blade's Edge Mountain, and his powerful fist would kill anyone who dared to challenge him. In the game, Dragon Slayer Gruul was also the final boss of the 25-man dungeon, Gruul's Lair. Gruul was born in the Outland and was a powerful creature with a demigod body. Legend had it that the Gollans raised the ogres, but ruled them by force. The Gollans usually had great strength and size. If one flew over Blade's Edge Mountain, they would find several huge Gollans wandering among them. They were Gruul's sons. For thousands of years, the Goran tribe and the Beastmen had been at war with each other. Moreover, Grom Hellscream and his father were famous for killing Gollan. Who knew that this time, Thrall personally visited Dragon Slayer Gruul. No one knew what Thrall promised. He only knew that Gruul had ordered Gerald to give up the passage and guaranteed that the Alliance army would not interfere in the war between the Alliance army and the Burning Legion during the Outer Realm expedition. This caught Duque by surprise. For this reason, Jaina specifically reminded Duque, "Be careful, the possibility of the Goran family joining the tribe is not small. Perhaps they had a feud. Since the Outland is going to be destroyed, it is not impossible for Gruul to make concessions and join the tribe in order to survive." Duque smiled. "Since we can subdue the Karaji insect people and recruit the Naga tribe, why can't the tribe have Goran? And it's not their first time working together." During the second battle of the Dark Portal, Orgrim had convinced some of the Gorans to join the Horde's attack on Silvery Moon City. March 3rd, Year 24 of the Dark Portal. If one only looked at the military map of the Outer Realm, anyone would think that the outcome of this war had already been decided. This was because apart from a small part of Moon Shadow Valley, all of the Outer Realms had the flags of the Allied forces. From the northernmost Netherstorm Zone to the southernmost Taroka Forest. From the westernmost Nagran to the easternmost Hellfire Peninsula. The Allied forces had almost wiped out all of Illidan's forces, and the rest were just some guys who were unwilling to be left out and engaged in guerrilla warfare, which did not affect the overall situation. Outside the Dark Temple located in the easternmost part of Moon Shadow Valley, the Shatar altar occupied by the Ordo faction of Shotrath City in the northwest, the Temple of Stars occupied by the Astrologer faction in the southwest. On the high ground in the west, where the ruins of Bali used to be, a huge horde barracks had been built. Echoing the horde barracks was the Watchman's Cage, which should have been controlled by the Grey-Tongue Oathkeeper. That place had now become the Alliance Barracks. 300,000 elite horde warriors were ready to go. The same was true for the 150,000 Alliance elites. Above the two barracks, countless flying battleships and raptor mounts covered the sky. If it were not for the fact that the entire Moon Shadow Valley had been severely corrupted by the dark powers, and all food had to be transferred from the Taroka forest area, coupled with the lack of equipment and other problems, it was estimated that the insane horde could pull out more than 1 million soldiers. Even so, the gathering of more than 500,000 troops was already a force to be reckoned with. In the north, the horde's formation, with the clans as the unit, was slightly loosely pieced together. The burly and majestic orcs were all panting heavily. The once crude wooden sticks, stone axes, and bone spears were gone, replaced by shiny metal axes, steel hammers that could easily crush boulders, and shiny spikes on their shoulder armor. Behind the orc formation, there were countless even taller and more burly existences. By the way, as a traditional fighting race, the orcs had the highest proportion of warriors. In the south, the Alliance's infantry formation was full of rigor and discipline no matter how one looked at it. The shields and armors were polished until they shone. Even the spearheads were neat and sharp. Anyone could feel that this was an army made of steel. Their will was as strong as iron, and they were indomitable. In the west, there were diesel tanks neatly lined up on the plains with black smoke coming out of their chimneys, and diesel trailers carrying huge cannons. With just a command, they would turn into a torrent of steel and drown the enemy. In the east, the front line closest to the Black Temple, there was a large and clear lake. In the lake that was not deep, thousands of Nagas were swaying their long tails, holding tridents or various weapons that were very characteristic of water battles, waiting quietly. Now, everyone's eyes were on the stage. In order for everyone to see clearly, the 3D projection controlled by 50 Morningstar mages magnified everything on the stage by 100 times, so that everyone could see clearly. Under the gaze of over 1 million eyes, the Alliance's outer region commander, Varian Rin, and the Horde's chief, Sar, walked up to the stage together. The Horde's warriors punched their chests, while the Alliance's warriors saluted. They used their own methods to express their highest respect to these two leaders. Unexpectedly, the two leaders did not go up to the stage, nor did they say anything to each other. They just quietly stood side by side, as if waiting for someone. At this moment, everyone saw a young wizard walk up to the stage. In front of the camera that had been magnified 100 times, everyone could clearly see that this unknown little mage was changing his appearance with every step he took as he stepped onto the stage. He really looks like Lord Marcus. Chapter 1460. If one were to say that the first few steps that Mark Dooku had given people the impression that they could still vaguely see Duke's elegance between his brows, then with the last few steps, everyone was shocked to see that Mark Dooku had completely transformed into Duke Marcus. This magical performance made everyone who recognized Duke open their mouths in shock, unable to close them for a long time. Who is he? A young orc who grew up in Nagrand asked his compatriot from Azeroth. Looking at the row of fangs on his thick black iron armor, one could tell that this old orc was a centurion. The centurion had a complicated expression on his face. If they had not seen it with their own eyes, it would be hard to imagine that this rough, green face full of pimples could express such rich emotions. He is the orc's former nightmare, the current commander-in-chief of the Alliance, the demigod of Azeroth, Duke Marcus. To the older generation, and even the new generation of Azeroth orcs who had grown up, the name Duke Marcus gave them all kinds of complicated feelings. Why do we have to listen to a human's orders? The young orc from Nagrand was very direct. The ones who came to save them were orcs from Azeroth. Why did orcs have to listen to a human's orders? The old orc's sigh was filled with infinite sorrow. Child, 24 years ago, I was as young as you. At that time, our world was not as bad as it is now, but many people could no longer survive. With the dream of conquering a new world, we crossed the dark portal. At first, we were invincible, killing millions of humans and dwarves. Then the alliance led by Duke Marcus defeated us, using all kinds of methods to kill even more orc warriors. Many orcs from Azeroth were unwilling to talk about this part of history. This was the first time the young orc and the orcs around him had heard this story, and their mouths were wide open in shock. 24 years ago, the humans could defeat us. Today they can do the same. But the human-led alliance suppressed their hatred for us, because we all have a common enemy, the demons of the Burning Legion. In order to rush to our world to save you, we also chose to cooperate with the human-led alliance. That's how it is. The Elder Centurion's explanation silenced everyone. None of the beast men knew what their future would be like, but no matter how bad it would still be better than staying in a world that was quickly being destroyed. This was why the orcs could maintain their fighting spirit even under the banner of the allied army. Compared to the beastmen's struggle, the alliance's soldiers were much simpler. When they saw Xueqi's face, not only did it evoke their impression of this commander-in-chief, but it also evoked all the glory they had obtained. Those days of glory that only belonged to the alliance lingered in the deepest recesses of the veteran's memories. From the darkest and most chaotic era, he saved humans, dwarves, gnomes, and elves from the despair of extinction, and finally achieved victory and revival. The eyes of the alliance soldiers lit up. No one knelt on one knee, because that was a gift to the king. However, the alliance soldiers had a more direct way of paying respect. Without any orders, they pulled out their swords in unison and raised the long swords in their hands high. Shing! With a long sound, 150,000 weapons were raised in unison, forming a mountain range that suddenly soared with cold light. Such uniformity and such a shocking aura caused the expressions of the 300,000 orcs to change. Salute to the alliance's commander-in-chief, Duke Marcus. 150,000 voices merged into one. There was no purposely dragging out the last syllable for the sake of synergy. There were no orders from the commander. All he felt was the utmost respect for this face. The soldiers were very clear about where their glory and pride came from. They were not the inheritor of Thoradin the Great's noble bloodline, but the inheritor of the will to unite all races to fight against evil in the ancient war. The innovator who had been committed to using technology to revolutionize this world and correct the mistakes of the past. The legendary figure who had reached the pinnacle of the Alliance's power as a commoner and became a demigod as a mortal. Yes. His name was Duke Marcus. Behind Xueqi, William had mixed feelings as he looked at the fanatical expressions of worship on the soldiers' faces, the mechanized armored troops lined up behind the formation, and the airships barely hovering in the sky. He had worked very hard, and his level of leadership had long surpassed that of his father, Lang. He still couldn't get the highest evaluation in the Alliance. That was because he could at most become a good king, a victorious marshal, and a qualified leader of the Alliance. He couldn't become a civil affairs expert who improved the standard of the people's livelihood, a scientist who improved the level of technology, a reformer who reformed the aristocratic system, or a super-legendary hero who killed even the demon king and the ancient gods. He suddenly realized that he had already passed the stage of growth where he always felt that he could do anything and that his abilities would never have an upper limit. William smiled. He had thought it through and understood his limits. There could only be one person who stood at the top of the world, but that person wasn't him. If he couldn't surpass it, he could only accept it. Otherwise, he would be courting death. Suddenly, his mood calmed down. William gave an Alliance military salute to Xueqi's back. Beside him, Sal's mood was equally complicated, but it didn't prevent him from expressing his respect for Xueqi's generosity and magnanimity. Without Xueqi's approval, there wouldn't be the redemption of the millions of orcs. If the Alliance was ruthless enough, they could even completely trap the Horde, blow up a certain huge area, and throw all the orcs into the void to die. For some reason, Sal always felt that Xueqi could totally do it. At this moment, Sal punched his chest with one hand, showing the highest respect that an orc could do to Xueqi. Xueqi gently raised his hands, palms facing down, and made a pressing gesture. For a moment, the Alliance soldiers sheathed their swords, and there was complete silence. Xueqi spoke. His voice was transmitted to every corner of the plains through the preset amplification magic. Nearly 30 years ago, the Burning Legion's commander killed Jaden, bewitched the orc great shaman Nizul, saying that the Dreamy Eye would bring destruction to this world. Thus came the cruel and bloody Battle of Shotrath. 24 years ago, under the bewitchment of the evil warlock Gul'dan who sought refuge with killed Jaden, Gromhel roared and drank the first bowl of devil's blood. Thus came the green-skinned violent orcs. Thus came the Azeroth invasion led by the first great chief of the Horde, Blackhand. Chapter 1461. 19 years ago, it was the hateful killed Jaden who turned Nizul into a big bomb. after he failed to murder the world of Azeroth. He threw himself into this world instead, causing the big explosion and collapse of the planet. After that, Illidan, who joined the Burning Legion, invaded this world and made it even more filthy and destroyed. That's right. Even though the Alliance and the Horde, the humans, dwarves, elves, Draenei and beastmen have all fought against each other in the past, and even now, there are enemies standing against each other. But as the witness of this cruel history, as the one who exposed the conspiracy, I, Duke Marcus, would like to say that all of these are the sins of the Burning Legion. As soon as Duque's voice fell, there was a big commotion below. First it was the Alliance, then it was the Orcs. Because of the simultaneous translation by the backstage personnel, the broadcast on the Orc side would be delayed by about a second. As a result, the reaction would be delayed by a second. The Orcs who stayed behind in Draenor knew that they were suffering. The world had exploded, and the world was still collapsing day by day. They did not know when they would all die together. Not many Orcs knew about the ins and outs of the matter. Even the wisest shaman in the clan only knew part of the content. Not to mention those who stayed behind, even the Orcs on the side of Azeroth were not completely clear about this part of history. Now that Duque had revealed the matter, it would be strange if they were not surprised. At first, the Orcs did not want to believe it, but they soon saw Thrall, who was standing next to Duque, make a gesture for everyone to continue listening. Before today, no one had thought that Duque would appear, and no one had thought that Duque would use such an argument. There was no doubt that such an argument was very popular, as it could minimize the hatred between the Alliance and the Horde. Although every war was caused by the will of countless forces and ambitious people, the biggest pot was thrown to the Burning Legion, and the rest was just a small pot. The corners of Duque's mouth rose, and he smiled. He thought to himself, "Kill Jaden. You're the one taking the blame, forcing me to continue pretending." Duque wasn't afraid that Kill Jaden would descend and beat him up. Kill Jaden's schemes had failed so many times that he would only become more careful. So what if he descended to the Outer Realm? So what if he wiped out the hundreds of thousands of soldiers present? Indeed, this was a huge blow to both the Alliance and the Horde. However, their importance was completely different. It would be a disaster for the tribe. Not only would most of the elites kneel, even the leaders would have to kneel. Although it was a heavy blow to the Alliance, it wasn't to the extent that they wouldn't be able to recover from it. After all, at the end of the day, the Duque who was standing here and speaking was just a puppet. There were so many leaders in the Alliance, but only Varian had come. Including Daneth Trollbane, who hadn't registered yet, there were only 2 leaders. Moreover, in Kil'jaeden's opinion, William's role was at most that of the Alliance's third-in-command. Instead of scaring Duque away here, why not continue his plot that he thought was flawless? Duque sensed that Kil'jaeden would not appear, so this mobilization meeting could naturally continue. We can't forget our hatred for each other. It's because we can't forget that we can truly feel the brutality and shamelessness of the Burning Legion. We can aim our swords at our true enemies, the demons of the Burning Legion. We're about to wipe out this land that was once almost completely occupied by the demons. There's only one target left, the Burning Legion's biggest pawn in this world, Illidan Stormrage. Only by defeating Illidan and restoring the glory of this temple that has been tarnished and renamed as the Black Temple. Only then can the common justice of the Alliance and the Horde be truly upheld. Warriors! Raise the weapons in your hands. Use your weapons to say no to these demons who destroyed our homes and attempted to cut off our bloodlines. Duke raised his fist up high and shook it with all his might. Defeat Illidan and walk through the dark portal with your heads held high. At that time, all the people of Azeroth will welcome your triumphant return. As Duque's voice fell, the entire plains erupted. Every warrior, regardless of age or race, let out an impassioned roar. That was the battle cry of the Orcs. Woo woo woo. That was the deep sound of the slit-hoofed bull's horn. Defeat Illidan. Glory to the Alliance. These were the cheers of the Alliance's warriors. Thump, thump, thump. Even the Nagas who had just surrendered to the Alliance used their tridents to hit the water, creating waves. They also remembered the glory of being high elves in the past, and also remembered Sargera's ruthless abandonment of them. The warriors of all races raised their weapons high again and again, using their voices to make the strongest sound against the demons. Their morale was high, and their voices rose to the sky. Almost everyone was shouting at the top of their lungs to vent the anger in their hearts, and they couldn't calm down for a long time. Finally, after waiting for the sound to stop for a while, Xueqi opened his arms, raised them high, and then pulled them back at the same time. The Alliance's side immediately quietened down, and the Horde side also calmed down after a while. Xueqi said loudly, "In the name of the Alliance's Commander-in-Chief, I hereby officially announce that from now on attack, target the Black Temple." At this moment, William stepped forward. "Vashj, come forward and listen to my orders." Under the backdrop of a huge water column rising from the ground, Vashj held an exquisite longbow and swayed her snake tail as she came to the platform. She bowed and knelt. "Vashj is here to listen to your orders." Xueqi raised his head slightly and smiled at Vashj. "First formation, Storm Naga. Your mission is to trap the Doom Walker." "Yes, sir." The Doom Walker, an enhanced version of the army's fell mech. Although the Alliance had always wanted to deal with this thing in advance, they should have received orders from the Burning Legion's higher-ups. The Doom Walker had retreated before the Alliance flooded the Moon Shadow Valley. Since then, it had been guarding the gate of the Black Temple. It was a hurdle that couldn't be avoided if they wanted to attack the Darkness Temple. Usually, it wouldn't be easy to kill such a thick-skinned thing. Because it was hiding in the Darkness Temple's territory, the entire temple had inherited the magic defense system from the Karabo Temple. In addition, the Darkness Temple had sent a team of Pharaoh to cast a spell similar to Protective Arrow, so the defense against the cannonballs was quite on point. However, with the Storm Naga, the Alliance had a simpler solution: flood. In order to carry out this water attack, Vashj had accumulated it for a long time with the cooperation of the dwarf craftsmen. They could finally pour out all the water in one go. Chapter 1462. A huge waterspout with a cross-section larger than a football field rose from the surface of the water at the farthest end of the east. With a deafening roar, it suddenly moved towards the east. In just a few minutes, it crossed a distance of 5,000 meters, passed through the huge passage between the Adama platform in the north and the ruins of Karabair in the south, and slammed into the huge mech Armageddon guarding the gate of the Dark Temple. The evil Eridar warlocks cast up a magic formation in an attempt to stop this terrifying waterspout, and indeed, they succeeded in resisting this direct attack. Unfortunately, from the beginning, the attack of the Allied forces was not meant to destroy directly. It was too much of a stretch to destroy the fortress of an army with a simple physical attack. Elements were also energy, and before the defensive energy was exhausted, there would not be too many opportunities for direct attacks. If they simply wanted to use magic or artillery to destroy the Dark Temple, they would have to bombard it until the end of time. Perhaps the entire Draenor would collapse before they could have a chance to do it. However, no matter how powerful the Eridar warlocks were, they could not suddenly make millions of tons of water disappear. A scarlet brilliance flashed, and the magic shield covering the entire temple lasted less than 2 seconds under the huge water column before it was declared to be broken. The rest depended more on the magic protection spell of the temple itself. Xueqi did not count on that at all. What he wanted was to flood the front gate of the Dark Temple and trap the super mech giant, Armageddon, in. Quagmire. Outside the Dark Temple, the demon King Veclor cast a large-scale magic, turning the entire front gate of the Dark Temple into a super big lump of paste. The Eridar warlocks had no way to deal with the unreasonable war magic of the Allied forces, which did not consume a lot of energy. They were more adept at fighting energy against energy and magic against magic. They were not good at changing the terrain to gain an advantage for their side. In order to prevent Armageddon from falling into the quagmire, the best way to deal with it was to quickly solidify the ground so that Armageddon could regain freedom and even have an advantage in mobility. Unfortunately, these Eridar warlocks were not good at earth magic in the natural series, nor did they know how to solidify the quagmire-like ground with wide-area frost magic. They watched helplessly as more than half of Doom Walker's body was submerged by the muddy water. At the bottom of the water to the west of Doom Walker, 36 high-grade Naga priestesses surrounded Vashj. Their cheeks trembled slightly, and a strange incantation sounded underwater, lingering on an ancient magic circle full of mysterious aura. Vashj, in her Naga form, opened her eyes and held 6 staves in her 6 hands, the tip of each stave bursting with bright light. Even in the murky water, the 6-pointed star magic radiance formed by the 6 tips of the staff was still shining in all directions. "No! Stop that traitor!" An Eridar warlock leader cried out in fear. "No, the magic formation seems to have been damaged," a warlock replied. "What?" Any war-grade magic array would need to cover an extremely large area. This was the price that had to be paid to increase the power of a spell. Most mature magic arrays had gone through countless generations of modifications to become as concise as possible. Therefore, every magic rune on the magic array had its own irreplaceable function. Heavily guarding the war-grade magic array was an unchanging habit that the Burning Legion had developed in the past 25,000 years. Logically speaking, it was impossible for anyone to sneak in, unless it was an invisible enemy. Hee hee hee. A cruel yet joyful laughter attracted the attention of a group of demons. A burly blue-skinned man appeared at the outermost end of the magic array. He had a similar appearance to the people of Eridar, such as the few tentacle-like long whiskers on his lower body. Unlike the people of Eridar, who still had good facial features in the midst of evil, his face was collapsed. His bumpy face seemed to be corroded by sulfuric acid. His protruding jaws had monster-like teeth, and a pair of eyes emitted a strange blue light. In an instant, the Eridar warlock leader recognized him and shouted his name in shock and anger. Despicable broken Akama! If the people of Eridar hated the Draenei because in their eyes, the Draenei were traitors, then their hatred for the Broken was even deeper. Because the Broken was a Draenei who had a disfigured face and lost part of their sanity. In the eyes of the people of Eridar, this was an inferior product of a traitor. This kind of existence that tarnished the noble bloodline of Eridar should be completely eliminated from the world. Akama was originally a Draenei archbishop. Nearly 30 years ago, during the battle against the Fell Orcs, he was corroded by the poisonous fog during the Shotrath explosion and became a Broken. He lost the protection of the Holy Light and was later influenced by Nubadan to learn the teachings of the shamans. Akama led the Grey-Tongue Death Oath to fight against the Fell Orcs led by Magtheridon. But in this life, because Illidan gained the trust of killed Jaden, Magtheridon became his subordinate. This meant that Illidan didn't help Akama and take him and his broken subordinates as his subordinates. The only difference was that Illidan captured Akama once and continued to extract a part of his soul to make Akama's shadow. Then, Akama used the racial talent of the Broken to escape. 500,000 troops attacking the Black Temple could not be hidden from anyone. When Akama took the initiative to contact the Alliance, hoping to help, Duque agreed. Obviously, Akama did a good job. He used a small magic dagger given by Duque to temporarily paralyze the protection circle of the Black Temple. Outside the temple, Duque's eyes narrowed. Akama succeeded. Salagia, it's up to you. Vasky smiled. Don't worry. The 6 staffs on her 6 arms shot surging magic at the front of the circle. Without giving the Eridar warlocks any time to react, countless seaweed-like plants began to grow wildly under the feet of Doom Walker. 1 meter, 10 meters, 100 meters. This strange seaweed not only had an extremely powerful entanglement, but it also had thorns on it. As long as there was a small gap on Doom Walker's body, the thorns would grow wildly inside. At the same time, the magical seaweed emitted bursts of yellow fluorescence, giving the Alliance's artillery fleet a clear indicator. Faint attack force, open fire. On the new flagship, the foolish Queen Ellie, Bulang gently waved his arm. Immediately, the old warships led by the Black Pearl began to approach the Black Temple at high speed and bombarded the main body of the temple. The purpose of the fierce attack was not to destroy, but to contain the magic defense of the Black Temple that could possibly recover. When Bu Lang saw that the last magic shield was destroyed, he finally ordered, Royal Brothel Team, listen up. Target. Doom Walker. Chapter 1463. All the shooting elements had been adjusted before the battle. Even taking advantage of the slow reaction of the Darkness Temple, many battleships had already completed the test firing. In fact, he couldn't blame the Darkness Temple for their slow reaction, because after recruiting Vashj, Duque confirmed one thing. Illidan had been missing for almost a year. It was purely the 4 members of the Illidari Council under Illidan that maintained Illidan's rule in the Outland. When there were no major events, the Illidari Council was still able to control the situation. Now that the Alliance army had led nearly 500,000 people to attack, the Illidari Council panicked. The most troublesome thing was that in order to balance the council and prevent his subordinates from having too much power, Illidan specifically set the number of people in the council to 4 and instigated them to oppose each other. Now, no one was willing to submit to the other, and they couldn't even make an effective stop. Wind direction is stable. There will be no air turbulence for the next minute and 30 seconds. Target locked. Fire. The next moment, more than a dozen battleships violently shook again and again. From the bow to the stern, It was the triple 406mm 6 Malawian Quach's main cannon that sprayed out fierce flames. The initial speed of the shells of the new naval cannon was not comparable to the old cannons at all. If the old shells could still barely see the trajectory of the shells, then the armor-piercing shells of the new 6 Malawian Quach's naval cannon had already hit Doom Walker before anyone could react. Bang! With a loud noise, a round hole with a diameter of more than half a meter appeared on Doom Walker's shoulder and body, and then there was a continuous muffled sound like muffled thunder. If Doom Walker was a living behemoth, it would have probably let out an earth-shattering scream at this time. As a mechanical creation and war machine, its battlefield analysis system was better than the ordinary army's Fell Reaver, allowing it to make the most accurate judgment. Lightning Fury! Doom Walker raised his arms high and released a lightning attack from his palms that was similar to a chain of lightning, drawing a strong electric field in the air in front of him that could not be passed by metal creations. Boom! 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 A bright explosion exploded in mid-air. Seeing this scene, Xueqi frowned deeply. The damage of the shells came from the explosion of gunpowder. If the shell did not explode in the designated area, then it would be insignificant to Doom Walker, who had an extremely thick alloy shell. In the sky, the Royal Brothel Regiment was already pouring down a hail of bullets with all their might. It was obvious that the power of the cannons on Earth during World War II was far from enough to pose a threat to the most advanced technology in Eridar. However, a weapon like Doom Walker had to be destroyed. Otherwise, when the magic defense system of the Darkness Shrine was reactivated, the Allies might not be able to break in even if they paid 100 times the price. This thing could easily crush a 10,000-man infantry regiment. Seeing Xueqi's embarrassment, Sal showed a rare smile. When conventional strength couldn't deal with an opponent, it was often the time for the strong to perform. On the podium, Sal leaned over. "Do you need help from the new members of the tribe?" Xueqi bared his teeth. He rarely felt the malice of fate. He single-handedly directed the Blood Elves to join the alliance, and the Forsaken almost died. Even Sal did not know that the tribe had lost a powerful race forever. But Sal, who was full of diplomatic talent, was worthy of being one of the favorites of the Goddess of Fate. Xueqi closed a window on the fate of the tribe, but because the way he blew up the Outland was wrong, the Outland collapsed earlier than expected, which produced another result. Sal walked into Gruul's lair with his bare hands and said to Gruul, "Our world is going to be destroyed. More than 100 meters of your territory, Blade Peak, is collapsing into the void every day. Come to Azeroth. The tribe has occupied a vast land there, enough for the orcs, ogres and golems to live together." Seeing that the golems could not conquer a world with their own strength, Gruul chose to join the tribe in the face of inevitable destruction. When he heard the news, even Xueqi could not help but feel a headache. Damn it! That's golems. Huge, one-eyed, and fearful. It was difficult for human language to describe the feelings that the golems, the ogre ruler, brought to the bystanders. There were rumors that the golems gave birth to the ogres. Even if this rumor was true, the golems had no love for their children. Their method of ruling the ogre tribes was ruthless and barbaric, and no matter what the facts were, one thing was certain. The golems had unparalleled force. In unreliable legends, the ancestors of the golems were rock guardian giants created by the titans on the planet of Draenor. They had huge bodies made of granite, as majestic as mountains, endless power, and the ability to change the earth. Once they followed the mission given by the titans, shaped the earth and sea of the world of Draenor, and fought an eternal war with the enemies of the titans, the primitive plant behemoths of Draenor. After the titans left Draenor, most of the guardian giants were affected by the curse of flesh and blood and degenerated into half-rock, half-organic cyclops. Their descendants were the golems. Although not as powerful as the rock guardian giants, the golems still inherited part of the power of their ancestors and had a close connection with the earth element of Draenor. Therefore, the most powerful golems had the power to change the landscape. The broken world of Draenor was now called the Blade's Edge Mountain. The rock spikes all over the place were created by the father of the golems, the dragon slayer Gruul, when he fought against the Black Dragon Legion. In theory, the earliest ogres were also the product of further degeneration after some of the golems were deeply affected by the curse of flesh and blood. Some historians even said that the orcs were another branch of the golems who were affected by the curse of flesh and blood. History could no longer be investigated. At this moment, the point of the matter was that the dragon slayer Gruul, who would have been killed in history, and his 7 sons were now alive and well and armed to the teeth. The natural hard skin of the golems was enough to give people a headache. Xueqi estimated that if he really had to face them, he would probably have to use armor-piercing bullets. Now that Thrall had obtained the golems, he was even more insane and asked the Rustwater conglomerate to prepare a set of steel armor for Gruul and his 7 sons. Think about it. A 10-story tall cyclops with an inverted triangular upper body and a super-muscular upper body that was more burly than the lower limbs. He also wore a set of super steel armor with an average thickness of more than 1 meter. From the breastplate to the crotch armor, from the shoulder and arm guards to the leg guards and knee guards. If it weren't for the fact that Gollin was only used to using his fists, Xueqi even thought that Thrall would prepare a 40-meter-long battleship slicing blade for Gruul. Chapter 1464. Seeing Gruul's gloves, which emitted ear-piercing clanging sounds when he moved his fingers, Xueqi felt a pain in his balls. The only fortunate thing was that the goblin's steel forging skills were not up to standard. Gruul did not use it for long, and several positions of the steel armor exploded due to the poor quality. Even so, Gruul, the king of Gollin, who had a demigod body, was still rising in strength. But no matter how strong Gruul was, he was now a thug of the Alliance. Xueqi did not hesitate and directly ordered, "Salaja, make way for the tribe's Gruul." "Yes, master." Vashj, who was underwater, raised her 6 arms high. On the edge of the plain, a huge crack appeared beside the muddy water. Everyone saw an unforgettable spectacle on the surface of the wide lake. They saw a white line visible to the naked eye appearing on the surface of the lake in the distance. The white line extended from the slightly higher plain, through the open space between the plain and the Darkness Temple complex, to the main entrance of the Darkness Temple, where Doomwalker was. When Vashj's raised 6 arms suddenly spread to the left and right, the thick white line also followed Vashj's movements and separated to the left and right, forming a wide valley of water on the surface of the sea. The cliff-like walls on both sides of the deep valley were, in fact, 2 parallel waterfalls. There was no waterfall on Earth that could compare to these 2 waterfalls created with extraordinary divine power. It was impossible to have such a high drop, and it was impossible to have such a long drop. Many people could not help but cover their mouths, for fear that they would lose their composure and make inappropriate sounds. This mighty power that could overturn oceans and rivers had completely exceeded the limits of mortal imagination. And this was just the cooperation of 2 demigods, Xueqi and Vashj. Xueqi supplied magic power, while Vashj's body descended to the outer realm to cast the spell herself. 1 big and 7 small, 8 behemoths ran on the wet bottom. The sound of the large metal armor colliding as it ran echoed between the 2 waterfalls. They did not seem to be running fast, but considering their astonishing strides of 10 meters, the distance of thousands of meters seemed to be covered in a short while. Perhaps at this moment, Doomwalker's system had repeatedly lit up with a red alert signal. Due to its ability to sense powerful creatures, Doomwalker subconsciously raised its head. Frenzy was activated. His fists moved back and forth like a piston pump, instantly increasing his physical damage by 100%. Earthquake erupted, and a huge crack instantly appeared in the ground, spreading from its feet to Gruul's feet. If it was another enemy, he would probably have made a small pit this time. Dragon Slayer Gruul was born to play with rocks. He didn't seem to make any movements, but he stomped his sturdy feet on the ground. It was that moment. The earth, which had been cracked open like a deep valley, suddenly closed up again. Fortunately, Doomwalker was a mechanical creation without life and self-will. Otherwise, it would have been angered to death by Gruul's big teasing face. At this time, 7 small figures suddenly jumped out from behind Gruul. In fact, their bodies were rather large, easily reaching the height of a 3-story building. In front of humans, orcs and ogres, they were absolute giants. It was only because they were compared to their father who had the body of a demigod that they seemed insignificant. The Gorons rarely cooperated with each other because they were already one of the most powerful individuals on this planet. Once they decided to cooperate with each other, the effect was quite amazing. The 7 sons of Gruul, led by Dun the Hungry, completed a spectacular joint attack. They rushed to Doomwalker's side almost at the same time and swung their fists together. Doomwalker chose the most efficient counterattack. A pair of arms, which seemed to be equipped with a brake, swung violently, and 2 of the sons of Gruul were directly smashed in the middle by the huge metal arms. The inferior steel armor produced by the gnomes once again displayed its shoddy workmanship. It didn't seem to be able to resist much of the impact, and with a crisp explosion, it shattered. Grolok and Skrook the Soulgrinder were punched from mid-air and smashed into the outer wall of the temple not far away. One was silent, probably not dead, while the other's huge body had sunk in and could not be pulled out. The casualties of their brothers did not bring sorrow to the other 5 sons, but instead aroused their fierceness. They took advantage of the holes created by the armor-piercing bullets of the Alliance's new artillery, stretched out their claws, and forcibly tore the limbs of Doom Walker with unimaginable brute force. Compared with the overwhelming firepower of the battleships before, this kind of violent destruction was a real threat to Doom Walker. If it was given some time, it could kill the 7 sons of Gruul one by one. The problem was that their father had arrived. Without any moves to speak of, Gruul came up with a punch. This punch was not simple. Just this punch alone set off a sound like a battleship crashing into a house at full speed. It was not just the outer wall that collapsed, the entire building was about to be smashed. In the face of an opponent with strength above its own, Doom Walker's counterattack program told it not to take it head-on. Unfortunately, the entanglement of the other 5 sons caused it to be hit in the vital parts. The thick chest armor was severely deformed in an instant, with a deep depression of at least 5 or 6 meters. Immediately after, Gruul unreasonably used his hands to tear open Doom Walker's breastplate with absolutely terrifying strength, revealing the power furnace inside that was emitting a dazzling green light. Ha ha ha! Gruul laughed wildly and smashed his fist down. Xueqi, who was far away on the podium, cried out, "Wait!" Unfortunately, for Golan, there was only one word in their fighting dictionary: reckless. They were reckless to any enemy. Reckless to the point of no reason. Reckless to the point of madness. As long as they could withstand it, they did not even mind rushing through the entire world. At this moment, Doom Walker seemed to have made a decision. Its huge body emitted a burst of electronic sounds that sounded quite shrill. In its chest, the demonic flames of evil energy flowed wildly, and the power furnace became brighter and brighter. This kind of light reminded Xueqi of a very bad thing. Thrall. Let Gruul run. Be careful of self-destruction. Thrall's command echoed in Gruul's ears through magic. However, Gruul, who had lost his mind a little, smashed his fist on the shockingly bright power furnace that seemed like it would collapse at any time. About a few seconds later, a bright green mushroom cloud rose in the direction of the main entrance of the Dark Temple. Thrall was dumbfounded. I told you to kill your opponent, not to kill yourself. Chapter 1465. No. Sal, who was standing next to Xueqi, did not hide his concern for Gruul the Dragon Slayer at all. Now the Horde was a generation behind the Alliance in terms of technology. If there were no professionals, if the Alliance went to war with the Horde, it would be like modern people fighting primitive people. Falling behind in science and technology wasn't something that could be fixed just by catching up. Sal thought hard and sadly found that the Horde was backward in all aspects. It could be said that they lacked everything: talent, funds, technology, and scientists. But what they really lacked was a leader with strong foresight. As a leader, making decisions was an unavoidable responsibility. Every day there would be people running to Sal, hoping to get the support of the Horde to invest funds and manpower to research a certain new technology. Sal was very depressed because he found that most of the people who came were goblins, and almost all of them wanted to scam money. What Northrend rubber planting plan? What barren land shaved ice production line? At first, Sal just threw people out, but later when it was too much, he killed them. Only then did the group of crazy goblins calm down. At first, he thought that the Horde had unreliable goblins. Later, under the surveillance of spies, he found that the Alliance had a similar situation. The High and New Technology Development Bureau, led by the master craftsman Jurban, reviewed more than 10,000 inventions or research applications from different races every week, of which less than 1% would be submitted to Xueqi for decision. Xueqi often only took half a day to review these applications, and even had time to read through the filtered applications. Those who should get out of the way would get out of the way, and those who should be killed would be hanged on the spot. Those who were recognized by Xueqi would often be personally explained or revised by Xueqi, and after some hard research, officially become the leader of new technology in the Alliance. Not just once or twice, but almost every time. King Tyrrhenas did not feel it during his 15 years as the leader of the Alliance, but in the past 9 years under Xueqi's rule, the Alliance's technology could be said to have exploded. Sal did not want to admit it, but he had to admit that there was no one like Xueqi in the entire Horde who could go straight to the point without taking any detours. He was simply a monster leader of new technology. He also hoped that the Horde could have such a genius. If there was, he would even be willing to give up his position as chief. Unfortunately, there weren't any. It seemed like he would never be able to lead the tribe to surpass the alliance. What saddened him even more was that Xueqi had actually become a demigod. In theory, he had an immortal body. How could the tribe play happily? Alright, since I can't surpass you in terms of technology, then you have your light of technology, and I'll walk my mysterious path. Gollin was a powerful creature at the top of the food chain in his old world. If they joined the tribe, it would definitely be another form of transcendence for the alliance. Looking at the entire alliance, unless the Dragon Clan was officially included, it would be impossible for the alliance to find a more powerful intelligent creature than Gollin. Now that Gruul was directly engulfed by the explosion, how could Sal not be worried? Phew! Gruul is fine. Xueqi sighed. There was a little bit of malice in his heart. He hoped that Gruul and the Doom Walker would perish together, but unfortunately, they didn't. In the system prompt, Gruul's injury was only medium wound. Gruul, this explosive guy, was worthy of being one of the top bosses in the game's Burning Crusade. It was clear that this was another nuclear day, but Gruul actually didn't die. He only used a pair of big claws to protect his head. He used the armor specially made for him by the tribe and his rock-like skin to forcibly resist this kind of big explosion. Even the 5 Silver Saints might have to kneel down if they were here. Gruul was in a sorry state. A thick steel armor had melted into a black and green molten substance like a paste. Fortunately, he had no hair, otherwise he would have definitely been roasted into a strange black and green color by the explosion like his rock-like skin. After the smoke and dust settled, Gruul sat down a little dispiritedly, gasping for breath. Then he looked at the Doom Walker, who only had a broken lower body, or to be precise, only 2 legs left. He let out a heroic laugh. Ha 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 dash. The vigorous laughter even caused the outer walls of the Black Temple, which had also been damaged by the explosion, to collapse. Xueqi waved his hand and said, "Cover Gruul." The flying fleet in the air suddenly split into 2, and with a violent vibration of the hull, a series of shocking gunshots sounded again. After a few breaths, almost all the western facades of the entire U-shaped Black Temple complex were fiercely hit by artillery fire. Attack! Sal and William gave the order to attack at the same time. The Horde attacked the Adama platform on the northern front, and the Alliance attacked the ruins of Karabaer on the southern front. These 2 huge building complexes were the 2 fortresses that surrounded and protected the Black Temple. If they wanted to attack the Black Temple, they had to take these 2 important places. These 2 building complexes had originally been abandoned, and in order to deal with the attack of the coalition forces, the Illidari Council had recruited a large number of demon guards to guard them. The seemingly monstrous water quickly moved away, revealing the wet ground. First, diesel tanks took the lead and attacked, continuously firing at these 2 places as they advanced. Then, engineering vehicles driving huge sloping steel bridges quickly approached the edge of the platform and the ruins under the cover of the scattered line of soldiers composed of humans and dwarves. The engineering vehicles turned their mechanical arms, and in less than 5 minutes, they built 15 huge slopes that were more than 5 meters wide in the north and south. The rough slopes allowed anyone to rush up the ruins and the platform along this slope that was at an angle of 30 degrees from the ground. Charge! In the name of the Holy Light. For the Alliance. Loktar Ogre. Different races, different languages, and all kinds of shouts formed a wave of earth-shaking sound that swept towards the Black Temple like a tidal wave. Even though the sound waves washed over the dark green walls and reflected back, it still shocked the eardrums of everyone several kilometers away. The tide of tens of thousands of soldiers swept through most of the land in front of the Black Temple, and the vast scene of tens of thousands of soldiers attacking under the cover of tanks could no longer be described in any language of this era. They charged with high morale. Even if their enemy was a larger and more terrifying demon army, they still had the confidence to destroy all resistance in their way. Seeing the coalition forces attack, Xueqi smiled and said through magic transmission, "My little maid, it's your turn." Understood. Vashj smiled charmingly. Chapter 1466. In the face of a high-level enemy, low-level soldiers could basically be said to have no resistance. Did that mean that low-level soldiers had no value? The answer was no. Low-level soldiers might be a kind of consumable in the eyes of many commanders, but without low-level combat experience, there would be no sublimation to the higher levels. Moreover, the wide-area killing power of the strong was not unlimited. It looked cool to wipe out an area the size of 10 football fields with one move. In terms of efficiency, this was simply the greatest waste of energy. If there was unlimited energy that could be squandered at will, it would not matter. In fact, in most cases, whether it was elemental magic or dark energy, there was an upper limit. Generally speaking, it was the upper limit of the strong themselves. What was even more impressive was that the battlefield could not bear the upper limit of the strong, such as Sargeras. There were not many places that could bear the full force of the old man's attack, and a planet would be destroyed in minutes. Legend had it that the titans of creation were evolved from the souls of planets. Perhaps there was some truth to it. If possible, Xueqi really did not want to use too much of the magic net's energy here. Almost 80% of the magic transmitted from Azeroth was consumed halfway, and half of the remaining 20% was a little difficult to control because it was mixed with the chaos elements of Draenor. Fortunately, he had Vashj. Vashj was not a demigod of Draenor, and after so many years of operation, Vashj could be considered to have half a home field. More than half of the Kolifong Reservoir's water was pumped over in one go, and the lower level of the Darkness Temple was finally flooded. This was also something that he was forced to do. As a transmigrator, and with Vashj, a traitor under Illidan, Xueqi was well aware that there was a large number of Naga troops in the lower level of the Darkness Temple. Those were the main elite forces under Vashj, and they were also the foundation that she had accumulated for thousands of years. In fact, she had told Xueqi many times that she wanted to take it back. If she did not take it back, Vashj would probably think of this heart-wrenching matter every night. The one leading them was the high-ranking warlord, Naj Entis. Logically speaking, they were all Vashj's subordinates, and it was not difficult to take them back. As a transmigrator, Xueqi knew that it was not a simple matter. Before Vashj became the commander of the Naga race, Naj Entis was already Vashj's most trusted confidant. As one of Vashj's earliest followers, he and Karethres paved the way for Vashj to take the leadership of the race. After Vashj succeeded in becoming the Naga queen, Naj Entis was appointed as a high-rank warlord, responsible for all military affairs for Queen Vashj. Karethres, on the other hand, was named the Deepwater Lord and was responsible for handling political and diplomatic affairs for Queen Vashj. However, this result aroused the conflict between him and Karethres. It turned out that the noble-born Karethres had always looked down on the commoner-born Naj Entis. Before Vashj became queen, the two had been scheming against each other. Although their status was equal, Karethres often ridiculed and belittled Naj Entis's background in public. Naj Entis had always restrained himself from Karethres' humiliation and suppression. However, as Karethres was named the Deepwater Lord and became the queen's close vassal, he could get along with the queen day and night. Although Naj Entis had sole military power, he was pushed aside, and it was very difficult for him to even see the queen. This caused Naj Entis's suppressed anger to finally erupt. In order to regain the queen's favor and his own position, Naj Entis began to plot a mutiny against the Deepwater Lord, Karethres. History stealthily took a turn here. Originally, Illidan did not completely rely on killed Jaden at first, but chose to attack the Darkness Temple in order to become the king of the Outland. In this life, Illidan relied more thoroughly, so he occupied the Darkness Temple without any losses and allowed the demons and fell orcs in the temple to smoothly rely on him. However, because there were no rich men to rely on in this life, Illidan chose to sow discord between Vashj and the brave Naj Entis in order to keep Naj Entis in check. Illidan asked Vashj to leave half of the troops stationed in the Darkness Temple, and he specifically mentioned that Naj Entis should stay. Vashj did not dare to disobey Illidan's orders. So Naj Entis stayed there as the guardian of the Darkness Temple. After many years, living on land for a long time had changed Naj Entis's body and personality. Because he had not been soaked in seawater for a long time, his scales lost their original aqua-blue color and began to turn gray. His eyes also began to turn blood red because of long-term contact with the demon's aura. He became irritable, and even more ferocious. The only thing that did not change was his longing for the queen and his unquenchable anger towards Karethres. The problem was that Xueqi knew about this, but Vashj did not. Or perhaps she had clearly noticed it, but the inertia of her thinking made her still believe that as long as she appeared, Naj Entis would still have a high chance of bowing to her, and then the Naga army would return to her hands. Perhaps this was what it meant to be unaware of the situation. It was hard to blame Vashj for this. After all, these two under her were guys who had been loyal to her for thousands of years. Even someone as quick-witted as Vashj could not be so sure of the changes in Naj Entis. Xueqi let out a breath of turbid air, turned his head and said, "William, I'll leave the command to you." "Uncle Xueqi, where are you going? Shouldn't you be?" William was a little surprised. As a commander-in-chief, Xueqi should be in the middle of the army. Even if Xueqi wanted to appear, he should do it after the other party's leader appeared. Xueqi smiled. Perhaps Duke Marcus is very important, but Mark Dooku is not. Xueqi could make as many of these delicate remote-controlled puppets as he wanted. After saying that, the phantom magic on Xueqi's face faded, and he turned back into Mark's appearance. William bared his teeth. Anyway, he could not do anything to this uncle of his, who was already a demigod. On the other side, in the water channel of the Darkness Temple, the turbid water that contained evil energy gave Vashti quite a headache. If it was an ordinary Naga warrior, they would probably be demonized in less than half an hour. Therefore, the ones who came this time were all carefully selected elites, and each Naga had brought several bottles of holy water in case of emergencies. Moroger Tidewalker, the leader of the deep-sea giants, took the lead. He used his huge anchor to dig a piece of the Darkness Temple's cornerstone, revealing a deep underwater passage. The unstable Hydus entered first. As the leader of the water elementals, he was definitely the best pathfinder. Next was the Deepwater Lord Carathres, followed by Vashti, and finally Moroger, who brought up the rear, entered. The Darkness Temple was once considered Vashti's home ground. The meticulous Vashti had already figured out the structure of this place. At that time, it might have been for defensive purposes, but now it had clearly come in handy. Chapter 1467. Silence. Silence. This kind of deathly silence made the assault team led by Vashti very uncomfortable. Before the attack, Vashti had already given a death order, and everyone was even prepared to fight against their own compatriots. This was not a big deal. Previously in the deep sea, if it was the boss or the second-in-command who did not agree with the boss, they would kill their own compatriots on the spot. This was really not a big deal. But now there was not a single enemy. What was going on? A haunted house? Nearly 1,000 elite Naga led hundreds of water elementals, dozens of sea giants, and striders in a single file. For a full half an hour, they did not encounter a single enemy. It was as if those guarding the lower levels of the Black Temple were all landlubbers, and they would run away as soon as they encountered water. There was a huge fork in the road ahead, and Vashti knew that she had to split up. Malogri. Left. Hydus right. Carathres. Follow me. Splitting up also meant risks, but unfortunately, there was no other choice. Leading nearly 500 main forces, Vashti and Carathres continued forward. Suddenly, a red light suddenly lit up in the water far ahead. The spiral-shaped red light seemed to ignore the resistance of the water, drawing a straight and ferocious line in the water. No, it did not ignore the resistance, but from the darkness above the water, clusters of seemingly endless red light first shot out, first rippling the water, laying an express path for the next attack. Then all the power was gathered into a beam in the enemy's hand. Without waiting for the light to fade, a shiny conical conch was directly thrown over like a throwing spear. The one who was hit was the Deepwater Lord Carathres. Even though he had been slightly on guard, he was still caught off guard. He only had time to raise his sledgehammer that was full of spikes halfway before the sharp conch shot arrived. He only managed to dodge the misfortune of having his chest pierced by the conch at the last moment, but he could not avoid his shoulder. The magnificent epic-grade right shoulder armor was easily pierced, and all the Naga nearby saw Carathres' right arm twisted in a posture that should not have appeared. This was because the conical conch's front was very sharp and thin, but it became extremely thick in the middle. When the powerful force pierced through the Deepwater Lord's shoulder, not only did it send his tall and sturdy body flying, the thickened conch even squeezed open his wound, crushing part of his shoulder blade and collarbone. Ugh! Carathres screamed as his body was nailed to the steel-like wall behind him. In the relatively clear water, everyone could see that the huge wound was still covered in thick veins of blood. The blood swirled along with the current and spread out in the water. Vashti's face immediately darkened. The high elven language that contained magic spread from the water into the darkness above the surface. Na intuze. This was the wrath of the queen. He was also angry at his former subordinate for attacking him without even greeting him. Even if they were enemies, this sneak attack still made Vashti feel deeply humiliated. The water level suddenly dropped, as if some machine was draining the water from the underground passage. Vashti suddenly took out a trident from her space storage bag and stabbed it into the water. Most of the water had been drained away, and what was left was only enough to soak Vashti's lower body. This was enough. The high ground in front was suddenly lit up, and the light of the magic lamp illuminated the surroundings as if it was daytime. After a short moment of discomfort for the Nagas on Vashti's side, everyone saw that it was a huge rectangular space the size of a football field. On the high platform, a snake-tailed monster with red skin and scales was staring at Vashti. Not in two. If the initial roar represented Vashti's anger, then the current call was a kind of, perhaps pity, or perhaps it represented uncertain feelings. It was difficult to regard the monster in front of them as a Naga. He could barely be considered a male Naga in appearance, but there were already too many differences in his physiological structure. At first glance, he was bigger than most of the male Nagas. He had skin and scales that were completely different from Nagas, and there were many pairs of red cone-shaped spikes on his thick snake tail, which reminded people of the tail of a giant dragon. Although he still retained the thick arms unique to male Nagas, the two wings on his head that were unique to Nagas had all disappeared. The nostrils and eyes had degenerated to the point where they were almost invisible, and the entire front of the head was like a smooth ostrich egg. It was just that the lower jaw was even more terrifying. Originally, a male Naga would have a mouth of sharp teeth. Now there were only a few huge canines on his lower jaw, each tooth larger than a human fist. You, demonized? Vashti's face was full of shock. Na-in-tu did not answer, but instead stretched out his thick left hand with great reverence. Your Majesty, you are even more beautiful. No. Have you recovered your previous beauty? Vashti's face quickly changed from shock to coquettish. You're wrong. In fact, from the beginning of the fall of Azhara, I have always maintained my beauty, relying on the ultimate transformation that my lord, Duke Marcus, gave me. After saying that, with Carithres's low groan of pain as the background, Vashti changed back into her high elf form in a burst of light. A head of shiny red hair, an impeccably delicate face, and an exquisite and curvaceous figure that was intentionally or unintentionally posed in an S shape was perfect and enchanting. Vashti smiled faintly. Are you envious? Are you jealous? It doesn't matter. Come back. Na-in-tu, Intuan, you are already my subordinate. I am already a true demigod of Azeroth. I can remove the curse on you and let you become that tall, handsome, and heroic you again. It had to be said that Vashti was very good at winning over her subordinates. Restoring the glory of the High Elves from 10,000 years ago was the greatest wish of these Nagas who had been suffering in the deep sea for 10,000 years. Now the hundreds of Naga elites around her had all begun to learn ultimate transformation, and dozens of them could barely maintain their elven form for more than half an hour. Although Vashti could not break Enzo's curse for so many subordinates in one go, it was at least a thought. Who knew that the trick that most Nagas had tried thousands of times would be rejected by Na-in-tu? Na-in-tu and pointed at Carithres, who was struggling, and sneered. Your Majesty, please forgive me for refusing. I have no interest in being a subject under your Majesty with that guy, who only knows how to flatter. You? Na-in-tu raised the sharp white conch in his right hand, which was his exclusive weapon. Your Majesty Vashti, I've had enough of your ambiguity. I know that every female Naga likes to use this trick against male Nagas. In fact, it works a lot of times because you females are always stronger than males. But today is different. I am stronger than you now. So I will defeat you and make you my wife, serving me for the rest of your life. Chapter 1468. Vashti's heart skipped a beat, and her face turned completely black. Not far away, the Deepwater Lord Carithres, who was still nailed to the wall, stopped struggling. It was as if the pain in his right shoulder had suddenly disappeared, and a playful expression appeared on his face. As a member who had personally experienced the Battle of the Twin Tower ruins, he knew very well how terrifying the power of the Lord's subordinates was. Although he had not seen the Lord in action so far, just the power he saw was enough to crush the entire Storm Naga clan, let alone a small Naj Entis. He did not speak, but shouted happily in his heart. Idiot! You're finished! Vashti, whose face was still bathed in the spring breeze half a second ago, was now only left with a bone-chilling chill. Vashti's slender fingers clenched into fists. Her arms trembled slightly, and she gently exhaled half a mouthful of foul air. With a flash of light, she returned to the appearance of a six-armed female Naga. Although there was no longer the terrifying snake hair at the back of her head, the scattered red hair slowly floated under the stirring of mysterious power. The aura of the Kolaifang Queen made her appear dignified without being angry. The sonorous female voice spread, and even caused slight ripples on the water surface. Naj Entis. For the sake of your loyalty to me for thousands of years, I will give you one last chance. Immediately. Immediately. Surrender to me and bind yourself. Kneel in front of my lord, Duke Marcus, and beg for his forgiveness. Otherwise, no one in this universe will be able to save you. Your new master, Illidan, can't. Your master's master, killed Jaden, can't either. Unfortunately. Ha ha ha. My beloved wife. This joke is not funny. Nagentus laughed wildly, and his rugby-shaped head opened wide. The ear-piercing laughter echoed in the not-so-bright underground sewer. Vashti sighed. Goodbye, Nagentus. Give up, only because of the arrival of an existence. Vashti lowered her hands and changed back to her human form again. But this time, she did not wear the queen's unique costume, but a set of white lace-made clothes. She obediently moved her feet with small, quick steps until she reached the back of a human mage who had been standing there for some time. Nagentus suddenly opened his eyes. Actually, this guy had eyes, but the pair of mung bean-like eyes above his mouth were too small, almost unnoticeable. He couldn't believe his eyes. From what he remembered, Vashti had never been loyal to anyone ever since she became independent from Queen Azhara. The terrifying deep-sea giant army never made her surrender. Even the cruel and cunning envoys of Enzoth failed to enslave her. Even in front of the unimaginably powerful Arkharans, she only showed superficial obedience. However, when he saw Vasky's gaze on this human, he felt as though he was struck by lightning, and his entire body trembled. What kind of gaze was that? That kind of absolute blind follower was like a fanatic. The kind of subservience that unknowingly placed oneself in a low position. It was the kind of fanatical love that seemed to have found the only meaning of life. Is she still the strong Naga queen who fought for her own world in the dark and terrifying deep sea? No dash with a shrill and furious cry. Nagentus threw a huge spine needle at the little human mage. It was an extremely slender and sharp conch spine needle. Any creature with an absolute strength of less than a ton that was nailed by the spine needle would never be able to pull the spine needle out with their own strength, and could only bleed to death. Nagentus wanted to nail the hateful human, nail his limbs, and let him bleed to the last drop of blood in despair. Duque didn't seem to react at all, even maintaining a smile on his face. He stood with his hands behind his back, as if he didn't see the spine needle that was rapidly expanding in his field of vision. However, in the next moment, a big hand with only 4 fingers appeared out of thin air and easily caught Nagentus' spine needle. 2 huge humanoid creatures that were almost identical appeared. You want to attack our lord? Have you asked us, brothers? The Karaji twin emperors appeared in shock. At this moment, everyone understood that it wasn't that Duque didn't want to make a move just now, but as the boss, how could he personally come out for a small high-rank warlord? No. He shouldn't even let the twin emperors appear. Because the difference in strength caused by the rank was too great. If Nagentus was a strong man with a demigod body, it would naturally be appropriate to send the twin emperors out. But everyone noticed that Nagentus was just an idiot whose body had been greatly strengthened by the demonic blood. His strength hadn't even stepped into the demigod realm. Calling out the twin emperors in this situation meant that Duque was unhappy. Perhaps the twin emperors had not been in battle for a long time, so they had the ugly appearance of being unable to take down Vashti a while ago. But the 2 brothers obviously had a better grasp of people's hearts. Their strength was obviously not equal, but they still called out the 2 brothers. There was only one meaning. Duque wanted a big victory, a crushing victory. Not giving Nagentus a chance to escape, the twin emperors rushed over together. Ha ha ha! Vecnalas used 4 continuous swordlights to deflect the spine needles that shot from above, below, left, and right in one breath. Veclor was even more fierce, completely disregarding everything, using his strange physical immunity constitution to directly crush them. Don't underestimate me. Come out. Tide. Nagentus fiercely swung his long tail full of spikes to the ground, and the water level that was originally only knee-high suddenly soared, swelling into a huge tide. Veclor snorted coldly and spat out 2 words. Ice seal. The huge wave that had just risen froze in an instant, turning into a huge ice sculpture. At this time, the Sword Emperor Vecnalas had already rushed to Nagentus' side. Roar! The high-ranking warlord roared, and the large conch that was his weapon slashed horizontally like a battle axe. The Sword Emperor sneered and casually pressed down on the Karaji Emperor sword. It seemed that the conch was larger and heavier. But the moment the two heavy weapons collided, it was completely different. Nagentis was horrified to feel the other party's earth-shattering strength, which was completely beyond his ability to resist. In one exchange, his weapon was knocked away. "Who are you?" Nagentis exclaimed. The Sword Emperor didn't move in the slightest, just a slightly nobler insect under my lord's command. With that, he flew up with a kick and sent Nagentis's huge body, which weighed at least 2 or 3 tons, flying. This wasn't the end. Suddenly, Nagentis found that the ground, walls, and even the ceiling were cracking from all directions at the same time. It felt like an earthquake because whether it was the ice or the stones of the underwater passage, they cracked at the same time and fell straight into the underground space. Chapter 1469. Whether it was the ice or the solid stone walls and pillars of the dark temple, they were like underwater to this mysterious creature, unable to stop it at all. And from the sound, there was more than one. "What the hell is this?" Vash's subordinates were a little frightened. Just then, they heard Veclor's announcement. "Go! Oro's children! Dismember that overconfident little demon!" When the creatures lurking underground suddenly pounced out from the ceiling, walls, and underground at the same time, Vashj and her subordinates finally remembered where they had seen these terrifying creatures. During the battle in the ruins of the Twin Towers, the Alliance had used these earthworm-like creatures to dig holes. This time they were used as weapons of war, and the effect was equally amazing. When Oro's children moved forward, they opened their mouths, and the thousands of teeth in their big mouths kissed and bit, and they could dig a big hole in the ground. The 6 crab-like legs behind the mouth parts moved gently, and they could push their bodies to move faster. Finally, the cracks on the hard stone spread to the ice layer condensed by the Demon Emperor, causing the ice layer to crack and shatter, splashing in all directions. Nagentis, who had just been kicked away by the Sword Emperor and was still dizzy from the fall, seemed to see an illusion. When he opened his eyes, he saw countless triangular teeth that seemed to grow out from every corner of the world. Under the contrast of the scarlet muscles of the mouth parts, they spun and pounced at him. "Don't even think about killing me." Nagentis waved his conch, and several spine needles shot into one of the squirming mouth parts. This time, the spine needles that had been tried and tested were no longer effective. Nagentis could clearly hear the sound of his spine needles breaking. Then the broken spine needles, along with the ice and stones, were swallowed into those teeth. Nagentis finally panicked. The most correct way to deal with this kind of underground creature was to dodge first and then attack the side of the mouth parts. But now, above, below, left, right, front, and back, all 6 directions had revealed wriggling mouth parts. Just this formation alone was enough to make him wish he was dead, let alone the Twin Emperors outside, glaring at him like a tiger watching its prey. Nagentis tried to break out of the encirclement, and sure enough, he was blasted back by the Sword Emperor. Feeling the stench, Nagentis finally despaired. "No!" He frantically swung his conch-like weapon, but in the next second, the Oro descendant on the right swallowed the conch along with his right arm. Next was the left arm, then the tail. Every one of Oro's descendants had bitten a part of Nagentis's body. At this time, a cruel light bloomed in the eyes of the Twin Emperors. In the Kila Empire, dealing with disobedient subordinates, sometimes we would pull out all of its limbs, leaving only its torso, and then wait for it to die in pain and despair. Since ancient times, punishments and whatnot were pretty much the same. When it came to sadism, there seemed to be no boundaries between countries and worlds. Xueqi was a little annoyed. His facial muscles twitched, but he didn't stop him. In the ancient times of the Celestial Empire, there was a dismemberment by 5 horses. Who knew that this time the Twin Emperors would actually come up with a dismemberment by 6 insects? Don't ask why the lower body of a male Naga only has a long tail. Why do they need 6 insects? Initially, Xueqi did not know about it. It was not until today that Xueqi found out that the male Naga actually had a physiological structure similar to that of a snake. "Hey! I didn't ask you to make it so dirty." Xueqi couldn't help but hold his forehead. The Twin Emperors were also annoyed. They didn't expect their flattery to go wrong. Then, stop the execution? Xueqi rolled his eyes and looked at Nagentis, whose 6 limbs were deeply embedded by sharp teeth, twitching and wailing desperately. Who the hell would stop it now? Could it be that if they stopped now, Nagentis would shed tears of gratitude and join Vashj? No. For a narrow-minded guy, no matter what kind of kindness was given, it would not be enough to erase his past resentment. It would only bury this hatred deep in the bottom of his heart until one day it took root and sprouted again. Xueqi sighed. Continue. I'll leave the rest to you, Saga. Yes. Vashti bowed her head deeply. Xueqi turned and disappeared into the dark passage, and his background was a huge limbless torso with flesh and blood splattering everywhere. Sword Emperor, you guys, quickly pull that thing out after eating it. The blood of a high-level demon will contaminate you. Drink Shotwrath holy water immediately after eating it. Demon Emperor. Hee. Naj Entis. Your soul belongs to the magic net. As soon as Naj Entis died, all the Nagas in the entire underground passage immediately chose to surrender. It was not shameful to offer their loyalty to their queen. Anyway, they were only forcibly bound by High Warlord Naj Entis. The battle broke out in the entire Black Temple complex. On the Atama platform. Support. We need support. A big guy, Doom Guard. The brown-skinned Doom Guard wielded a huge broadsword and easily beheaded several orc warriors. However, in the following days, it had to face its former compatriot, an Apocalypse Guard with 2 black chains circling it in a clockwise direction. Traitor! The Doom Guard scolded. I don't want to. The Doom Guard enslaved by the Warlock had a ferocious look on his face. He tried to resist the Warlock's control, but failed again and again. He could only desperately swing his sword at his compatriots. The demons enslaved in the Legion Fortress had now become one of the core siege weapons of the tribe. The ruins of Karabair in the south. Faced with the attack of the Doom Guards, the Alliance's approach was completely different. Similarly, the defense warriors went up to resist the first wave. Those who could resist the first wave would receive help from their companions. Those who were not so lucky were directly knocked dozens of meters away and fell heavily to the ground. Even more unlucky, their shields and heads were cut in half and turned into corpses. This was a double test of skills and equipment. If they could survive this trial of blood and fire, they would be able to obtain the most valuable combat experience, as well as the purified equipment of their enemies. Moreover, they did not rely on themselves to fight. Many new weapons of the Alliance also grandly appeared. The Iron Fist rocket launcher was an anti-large demon weapon developed by the Alliance commander Xueqi himself. It was propelled by a simple diesel booster, and the warhead was loaded with a pound of semi-solid high-purity Shotwrath holy water. It would not miss within 20 meters, and if you were lucky, you would still hit within 50 meters. As long as it hit, the elite demons would be in so much pain that they would rather die. The Alliance soldiers had used it and said it was good. Among the non-professional Alliance infantrymen, basically every 10-person squad would be equipped with 2 Iron Fists and 10 rocket launchers. Chapter 1470. Of course, if it was in a slightly narrow hall, the Iron Fist wouldn't be able to handle it, and the PAK-40 would be too close. There was also the spare Luij 1875 mm cavalry cannon. The problem was that the Alliance didn't send many strong people this time. This was one of the more depressing things for the Horde. Most of the strong people in the Alliance were holed up in Azeroth. They said that they were there to consolidate the rear and stabilize the economy. If it wasn't for the fact that the Alliance had been kind enough to save the orcs, Thrall would have suspected that the Alliance was plotting something. Originally, this kind of cannons that were spread out in a herringbone shape were quite easy to use. At least 3 skilled cannoneers were needed to operate it well. It wouldn't be a problem for the muscular dwarves to do it and drag it away. Logically speaking, it should be called an infantry cannon. First of all, this wasn't the real PAK-40. Because it was for indoor use, the shameless Xueqi directly made it a weaker version. The length of the rifling was reduced from 2.4 meters to 1.5 meters, and the length of the cannon was reduced from 3.7 meters to 2 meters. The bugs were also tough. After a battle, the bugmen warriors were fine after more than 100 cannons. If it was a human, their organs would have been dislocated and they would have died. In the assault team, every 200 people was equipped with a PAK-40 75 mm cavalry cannon. Muradin smacked his lips. You make it sound like your warlocks didn't get information from the demon. The Alliance is similar, but we happened to catch a high-level one. The problem was that Xueqi was very confused about this strange thing. I can feel the power of this demon, even though I haven't fought it directly. Orgrim sighed. When the Alliance spent half a day clearing out their respective targets and then brought the flames of war to the Black Temple, the first difficulty came. Muradin recalled. According to the information, it should have been created by Magtheridon, but Magtheridon didn't seem to have enough energy to make it move. It used to be just a pile of stones, not a demon. But Illidan injected a blue demon energy into this giant hellfire. That's how it came to be. The Kiraj Bugman bosses praised this move. Orgrim was the one leading the charge, and Muradin Bronzebeard was the Alliance's leader. The PAK-40 was the best choice. According to Duquesne's theory, the machine guns and cannons that were trial-produced were all due to the lack of precision. Basically, if they were not built to the size of a house, they would not be able to fire continuously. The situation of jamming was very serious. When it wasn't so urgent, the dwarves invented a very shameless tactic, which was to directly install this kind of cannon on the back of the Karaji insect mount. Duque didn't know what he was doing, but the Alliance's technology tree was a little off. The Horde and the Alliance were using their own methods to train their warriors on the northern and southern battlefronts. Looking through the binoculars from afar, Orgrim felt like he could already see countless warriors of the Horde being burnt to a crisp by its flames. In order to ensure as much armor-piercing power as possible, this inevitably reduced its effective range to 500 meters, but it also succeeded in reducing its weight from 1.5 tons to 800 kilograms. The Karabayr ruins was an extremely complicated place. His exact words were, "God is F*** King Holy Light. How dare you call yourself an infantryman? You're my cavalry. No. You have to change it to a cavalry cannon." For the time being, for the sake of high mobility, each group of PK-40 will be equipped with 2 trained pack horses that are not afraid of explosions, or a Karaji insect. The only drawback was that it only had a shelf life of 30 days. In indoor combat, the demon guards could be dealt with by professionals, but against the Apocalypse guards, other than Iron Fist, the Alliance also needed a medium to long-range firepower to cover them. Speaking of which, how could a cavalry charge with such a heavy cannon? Especially this kind of PAK-40 cannon. Because of the support of the Naru of Shotrath City, the Alliance specially made a batch of Holy Light cannons. The specific principle was to place the warheads of the cannons in the direct range of the Naru's light for a night. Then within 30 days, any demon below the rare elite level would all be killed in one shot. The Infernals were least afraid of close combat. This curve-firing short-range artillery was similar to a mortar. It was similar to a mortar, but it had a penetrating power that a mortar did not have. In general, it was not as powerful as the PAK-40 against large demons, because the total weight was less than 300 kilograms. Although Duquesne's instruction was to find a horse to lead it, when it was urgent and the distance was short, the dwarves directly carried it. Soon, the Alliance soldiers knew how far-sighted their commander was. After announcing that Vasht's Naga had occupied the lower waterway of the Black Temple, the Alliance soldiers passed through the military ramp that the Naga had built and came to the platform in the middle of the Black Temple. There was a training ground that was at least the size of 10 football fields. Now, even the breaks were saved. And because they had been dealing with large enemies recently, the machine guns and automatic rifles that should have been developed were all gone. Instead, cannons that were close to the level of Earth's World War II were made. There were too many soldiers and too few long-range soldiers. I really don't know where the Alliance's accurate intelligence comes from. Orgrim complained a little. Duque was also speechless. I know, Supremus. Orgrim's face was obviously conflicted. In the past, this was the place where Illidan trained Illidari's troops, and now in front of the Alliance were waves of demons. Demon guards, hellhounds, infernals, and a few huge abyss lords. It couldn't be helped. The tribe was almost entirely made up of muscular men. If it wasn't for the Sun King and Astrian's forgotten pharaoh, the tribe could be said to be full of melee fighters. Originally as the Temple of Karabayr for the Dreeny Eye, the terrain here was quite open, and many of them were large palaces. Unfortunately, it was scourged by the fell orcs for more than 10 years, and then the demons came to cause trouble. A large group of Eridar warlocks did summoning, forbidden experiments, and so on, making this place a mess, and the terrain became incomparably complicated. Not to mention the large group of monsters in front. Just this huge infernals was equivalent to the bane of the tribe. Because the tribe was now from top to bottom, from the small soldiers to the strong heroes, it was all unbalanced. But in the Alliance, the military was Du's word, so in the end, it was strangely called the cavalry cannon. Muradin curled his lips. Have you seen the intelligence on this guy? And guarding the gate of the training ground was a very special infernal. No one had ever seen such a big infernal. It was too big. It was so big that if Doomwalker was still here, he would probably be shorter in front of its exaggerated height of 15 stories. Chapter 1471. Advanced? How advanced? Orgrim did not believe that the information Xueqi stole from the ancient war would be completely applicable 10,000 years later. Second only to the two great commanders, Archimonde and Jaden. Since recovering his memory, Muradin had matured a lot. Since his elder brother had repeatedly told him not to reveal anything about Xueqi, then Muradin did not mind bragging. Anyway, there was no friendship between him and the tribe like the 15 years of the Dark Portal. When he went to Northrend and was tricked by Earthies, the old tribe had already collapsed, and Sar was still a prisoner of Lordaeron. Muradin did not know that his bragging this time would actually trigger an incredible chain reaction in the future. The front line was in a dilemma, and the commanders in the rear were also having a headache. At first, when he saw the enemies in the training ground exposed within his field of vision, Bu Lang directly ordered the bombardment. Then, perhaps having learned the lesson of the Doom Walker being bombarded, Akama's destruction seemed to have been contained. The Black Temple restored the magic defense system, and all the direct artillery shells were bounced off by a magical dark disc-like thing. This brought the problem back to square one. The Alliance could send people in, and the protective circle would not reject any direct invasion of soldiers, but the casualties would be bound to be very serious. According to the strategy revealed by the Alliance, this big guy could summon volcanoes. If they wanted to kill it, they might have to send an army to be sacrifices for the flesh mill. Let me go. Dragon Slayer Gruul stood up, panting. Wait. Let the people below clear the obstacles first. Those demon bastards don't have to send out the Dragon Slayer. Besides, the Alliance hasn't made a move yet. Sar did not dare to dissuade him directly, so he tried to persuade him tactfully. Okay. I hope the Alliance you speak of is really as strong as you say. Gruul was not so easy to talk to. In the eyes of Gollin, the weak deserve to be dominated, just like Gollin had enslaved the ogres for thousands of years. Perhaps Gorin would temporarily endure in order to escape from this desperate world, but once they found that their allies could not stand on the same level as them, then they would definitely not hesitate to attack their allies. On the other side, William caught a glimpse of the scene where Thrall was persuading Gruul. He chuckled, and turned to Vale. Although having an extremely powerful uncle puts me under a lot of pressure, sometimes I wish Uncle Xueqi could be more powerful. Valilla shrugged and returned the little, I know look. Duke Marcus had never disappointed the Alliance. Not in the past, not now, and not in the future. Indeed, Xueqi's voice came from the commander-level magic communication network. All troops retreat. Leaders, please start reading the information of the leaders of the Darkness Shrine. The expression on Sal's face was a bit interesting. Did Xueqi's words mean that this big guy who gave anyone a headache was already a piece of cake? At this moment, Xueqi, who was sitting upright in Karazhan, crossed his legs and enjoyed the massage service of the Windrunner sisters. Perhaps the descendants of the magic element were too troublesome. Anyway, Aurelia and Sasha's bellies did not seem to be bloated, so it could not be considered as making pregnant women do hard labor. Ha ha ha. This is called strategizing light years away. Who is more awesome than me? Xueqi laughed. Aurelia could not stand it anymore. She was originally going to massage Xueqi's back, but in the end, it turned into twisting his soft flesh. Humph. Io, you guys are not willing to go out and fight to death. I'll control it. Can't I have a rare chance to show off? Yes. It's not a problem to order Vashj around. Sasha's words made Xueqi feel a little apologetic. This Salagia volunteered. I didn't want to either. But Vashj's divine sword at the tip of her tongue was too smooth, and I couldn't help but slap her. In the cinema-level widescreen magic mirror, the scene changed. The demon army, who were waiting in formation, did not see idiots who were going to die, but a world-shaking shock. Earthquake? No. It was a flood. Using the abilities of Oro's descendants, several large pits appeared in the large training plaza. In a few breaths, the few pits became dozens, then hundreds. At first, these pits had all the demons above them trapped in, and these bottomless pits looked like destructive traps. A few seconds later, the rumbling sound of water coming from deep underground told everyone that this was not a pit at all, but a waterway specially opened for water to gush out. Suddenly, a humongous water elemental appeared. This enormous creature was almost half the size of a town. Its two arms were like two cargo ships, and its enormous inverted triangular body was like a mountain. Mortals standing at its feet would not be able to see the top of their heads even if they looked up. The water swirling around its lower body formed a waterspout, and the turbulence brought with it specks of azure light, very beautiful. But as soon as this enormous creature appeared, the platform that was at least 50 meters above the ground of Moonshadow Valley sank into a vast ocean of water. Unstable hiddens. Thrall was truly shocked. He had never thought that the water elemental that had attacked the ruins of the Twin Towers back then would actually display terrifying strength close to that of the water elemental king. The legendary water elemental lord of Azeroth, Tidehunter Neptulin, was only at this level, right? Whether it was Thrall or the other existences, they had all been deceived by Xueqi. How could a mere serpent temple boss have this strength? No one had tried to overcharge elemental creatures, so no one knew that the elemental creatures of the 4 major elements could temporarily grow in size according to the elemental content in their bodies. What Xueqi was doing now was just temporarily pouring the water elemental from the Draenor weave into Hidden's body, making this guy temporarily grow like a balloon. The upper limit of Hidden's own talent determined the quantity and quality of water elemental that it could use in a unit of time. So now it was just for show. The problem was that no one else knew. Its appearance directly caused the demons in the entire training square to jump up and down. Vashj manipulated the last wave of water and hit the entire square fiercely. The demon guards that were originally in formation on the square were directly swept up into the sky by the water and then thrown around. Some of the Apocalypse guards were almost howling, urgently flapping their wings in an attempt to fly out of the shroud of the tide. Who knew that in the depths of the tide suddenly a huge arm made of water would suddenly pull them down? Several unlucky ones directly hit the surface of the water. Even though the bottom of the training ground was originally under the water, they ended up crashing into a deeper layer with a gotcha sound. Who knew if they turned into a large meat pie or were caught by some aquatic monster? There were also hellfires that did not wait for the waves to extinguish the flames on their bodies, and were directly cut in half by the Naga Siren priest, who had half of her body floating out of the water with a water blade. Upon closer inspection, he discovered that these water blades were actually made of holy water. Chapter 1472. Perhaps before the widespread use of the holy light, no leader of the Alliance would have thought that Naru could be so useful. They accepted the Draenei as a race with a right to vote, mostly out of justice, faith and morality, which had nothing to do with benefits. However, after all the weapons were transformed into the holy light, they suddenly felt that the whole world was different. In terms of dealing with demons, there was no weapon more effective than the holy light. If it was during the Second World War the Dark Portal, to kill a hellfire, it would require at least the first and second generation Holy Knights of the Silver Hand to act, or a group of mages to forcefully blast it to death with magic. Now, 3 gunners who had trained for at most a week could easily kill a hellfire with the PAK-40 cavalry cannon. This was unimaginable in the past. It was the same for the Nagas. In countless legends, the Nagas were evil creatures. They were traitors who betrayed their compatriots and even all intelligent creatures of Azeroth. Their ugly appearance was the curse of the planet. In fact, this was not the case at all. The High Elves had become like this purely because of the evil power of En-Zoth. In essence, they were a kind of neutral creature. It was only because of the harsh living environment and the bad habits left behind in the Azerite court that they often committed malicious acts of deception and deception. Now, when the Nagas stood on the side of the Alliance, everyone could deeply feel the power and usefulness of the Nagas. Under the joint control of the unstable Hydus and Vashj, who was hiding below, this huge wave of water dozens of meters above the ground was like the clouds in the sky, rolling back layer by layer. In an instant, it formed a huge ring-shaped wall of water around the huge Hellfire Supremus body. It was as if endless water sprayed out from the dozens of holes, forming a huge independent space, isolating Supremus from the other demons. Then after all the water rushed into the air, under the control of a mysterious force, it gathered on top of Supremus, who was at a loss. When the water had gathered more than 10,000 tons, all the water poured down. The waterfall-like water slammed down, forming a fire and water relationship with the huge blue flames of the hellfire. The thick water column bared its fangs and brandished its claws, like the mouth of a dragon, trying to swallow the hellfire in one gulp. The ultra-high temperature of the demonic flames evaporated the water dragon, and the water dragon was also trying hard to extinguish the damn flames. Just as the surroundings were filled with white light, everyone thought that the battle between water and fire would last for a long time. A huge anchor suddenly broke through the bottom of the training ground, drawing a strange arc in the water before accurately hooking onto the back of the hellfire. Hee hee. Come down. A huge sea giant revealed half of his body through a big hole. He then pulled the thick iron chain connected to the anchor with one hand and dragged Suprimus down. If it was a battle of pure strength, Suprimus might not necessarily lose to Morrogrim Tidewalker. It was obvious that there were other existences that had dragged Hellfire into the water. Everyone seemed to see a super big fish the size of a small fortress biting on the chain to help. Vash's subordinate, the big fish boss Yusler, also helped out. In a land battle, Suprimus wasn't afraid of Vash's subordinates. Now, with a single order from Xueqi, the land battle had turned into a water battle. Could it be that a mere large hellfire could overturn the heavens? A few serpent shrine bosses acted together, and suddenly Suprimus was forcibly dragged into the water area of the lower level of the Black Temple. Strings of blue bubbles were still bubbling up from the deep waters, popping and popping one by one. This seemed to indicate Suprimus' inevitable fate. High temperature could indeed evaporate water. But how much could it evaporate? If 1,000 tons wasn't enough, then 10,000 tons. If 10,000 tons wasn't enough, then 1,000,000 tons. At the end of the day, this was an issue of conservation of energy. Now, Vashj had used the Kolai Reservoir's water pump to transfer almost all the water in the outland. If a mere Suprimus could evaporate the water of a continent, then there was nothing to say. Otherwise, he would definitely kneel. No one wanted to know what kind of game Vash's subordinates were playing with this large hellfire in the deep waters. Anyway, when Thrall and Varian saw Xueqi appear again, it wasn't long before Vashj also arrived. She transformed into her high elf form and bowed. "My lord, Suprimus has been executed, but more than half of the water pump is broken. We can no longer move the water pump to a higher place. The Storm Naga's next role will be quite limited." Xueqi didn't care. "It's okay, you and the Storm Naga did well. There will be scribes who will record the credit for clearing the supply line and taking care of the Doom Walker, Nagitus, and Suprimus. If we take down the Darkness Shrine, you will definitely have a share of the spoils of war." Vashj's face was filled with joy. Victory was a good thing. As long as there were spoils of war, it would definitely make the Nagas feel a stronger sense of belonging to the Alliance and their master, Xueqi. Naturally, what she said was another matter. The Storm Naga is already very satisfied to be able to share a little of Master's glory. "You're not an outsider, no need to be polite." Xueqi waved his hand. "Next, who else under you can attack the high-level Darkness Shrine?" Vashj raised her hand, and the ancient longbow engraved with magic patterns immediately appeared in her hand. Her face was fanatical, and she only said one word. "Me." "Very good." Thrall was envious of Vashj's performance, and he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Indeed, there was no harm without comparison. It was not easy to take in the Goran tribe, but deep down, Gruul was extremely arrogant. Not to mention the Goran tribe, even the Forsaken and the Goblins gave Thrall a feeling of being united on the surface. Unlike the Karaji insect people and the Storm Naga, they were like loyal dogs from the start, and they did not even have the right to vote. In politics, they were absolutely consistent with the leader of the Alliance. In the past, the Great Chieftain had the final say in the tribe, and everything was decided by the Great Chieftain. The Alliance was more like a rookie alliance, and they were a bunch of hindrances. Now, the Alliance was like the Horde, and the Horde was like the Alliance. Under Xueqi's command, the various kings and leaders of the Alliance performed their respective duties and operated efficiently. On the contrary, the Horde had all kinds of contradictions. If it were not for the Burning Legion and the Calamity Legion, the Horde might have fallen apart on its own. Shaking his head and dispelling those bad thoughts from his mind, Thrall looked at the situation in front of him. After Suprimus was dragged to the lower level and killed, the flood quickly receded. Apart from the water stains and holes on the ground, it was impossible to imagine that the flood had just swept through this place that felt more like a mountainside. The road ahead had been cleared.